In today's fast-paced world, falling asleep peacefully can be hard. Worries, stress, and a busy mind often keep us awake. But the gentle wisdom of the Buddha teaches us how to calm our thoughts and rest deeply. These 3 hours of Buddhism stories are shared to bring comfort, healing, and quiet to your heart. Each story carries a soft lesson to help you let go of anxiety, relax your body, and drift into restful sleep. Through these peaceful tales, you'll discover that true calm begins inside, and that even in the darkest night, stillness is always within reach. The Silent Offering of Venerable Sumana. In a quiet village far from the bustling cities, there lived a humble monk named Venerable Sumana. Though unknown to many, his deep practice of silent giving carried a powerful message. He taught that offerings made without pride, without the need to be seen or praised, bring the greatest peace to both giver and receiver. Venerable Sumana rose each morning before the sun touched the sky. While others slept, he would walk barefoot through narrow paths, placing small bundles of food and cloth outside the homes of the poor, the sick, and the forgotten. He never knocked, never waited, and never left his name. The villagers only knew that kindness came with the morning light. One evening, another monk visiting from a large monastery observed Sumana's quiet acts and asked, "Why give so secretly? Should not generosity be shared so others may follow your example?" Sumana smiled gently and replied, "The flower does not bloom to be seen. It blooms because it is its nature. True giving asks for nothing in return, not even to be remembered." The visiting monk remained quiet, but questions stirred in his heart. That night, he followed Sumana at a distance and watched as the old monk knelt silently outside a broken hut, placing a warm blanket near the door. The wind was cold, the sky dark. Sumana simply bowed to the ground and walked away into the night. The next morning, a woman from the hut appeared at the village square, wrapped in the blanket with tears in her eyes. "I prayed for help," she said, "and someone answered, not with words, not with promises, but with silence and care." She clutched the blanket like a sacred treasure. Over time, the village changed. More people began helping each other quietly. A sack of rice would appear at a doorstep. A firewood bundle would be stacked near an old man's hut. No names, no praise, just pure, silent giving. Sumana never spoke of his offerings again. He continued until the end of his life, his presence as light as the wind through the trees. Though many never saw him, everyone felt him. Moral of the story: true generosity does not seek recognition. It flows from the heart, silent and sincere. In a world full of noise and wanting, the purest gifts are those given in silence, with no expectation, only love. The bhikkhu and the crying wind. In the cool hills of an ancient forest monastery, a young bhikkhu struggled with loneliness and fear. The wind in that forest was unlike any other, deep, echoing, and strange. At night, it sounded like someone crying, soft and haunting. The young monk, new to monastic life, could not sleep. Each time the wind wept through the trees, his heart would race and doubts would fill his mind. Why had he come here? Why leave everything behind for silence and shadows? After weeks of sleepless nights, the young bhikkhu approached the elder of the monastery, a calm, grey-eyed monk who had lived in the forest for many years. "The wind sounds like it is grieving," the young monk said. "It frightens me. It makes me feel alone." The elder nodded, listening without judgment. Then he said quietly, "Yes, the wind does grieve. It carries the cries of the world, loss, pain, longing. But it also carries peace, if you are still enough to hear it." That night, instead of hiding beneath his blanket, the young monk sat outside beneath the swaying trees. The wind came again, its long sigh winding through the leaves like a broken melody. He felt fear rise, but instead of running from it, he breathed slowly, deeply. He listened. He heard not just the sorrowful sound, but the rustle of leaves, the bend of old branches, the distant call of an owl. He noticed that even in the sound of crying there was life. There was movement. There was space. The wind was not his enemy. It was the voice of the world, of change, of impermanence. The fear began to loosen its grip. Something inside him shifted. Over time, the crying wind no longer disturbed him. It became a companion in the night, reminding him that emotions rise and pass, just like wind through the trees. What once felt like sorrow became a song of freedom. Moral of the story: fear often comes from resisting what we do not understand. When we listen deeply, even sorrow has a voice of beauty. Peace is not found by avoiding discomfort, but by gently turning toward it with compassion and stillness. Like the wind, all things move through us, then pass. The lost sandal of the Anagarika. Long ago, in a dusty village nestled between rice fields and stone paths, there lived an Anagarika, a lay devotee who had given up his home and possessions to walk the path of simplicity and service. He wore only a plain robe, carried no money, and owned just a small cloth bag, a bowl, and a single pair of old sandals. These sandals, worn but cared for, protected his feet as he walked miles each day to beg for alms, sit in meditation, and quietly help others. One hot afternoon, after meditating under the shade of a banyan tree, he awoke to find that one sandal was missing. He searched the nearby bushes, retraced his steps, and asked the children who had been playing nearby. But it was gone. A single sandal remained beside him, useless without its pair. At first, the Anagarika felt a wave of frustration. He had so little, and now even that was taken. A sharp stone cut his bare foot as he stood. Pain rose, not just in his skin, but in his mind. Thoughts swirled. Why would someone take it? Why me? How can I walk now? But then, sitting down beside the tree once more, he placed the remaining sandal in front of him and watched his thoughts like clouds passing across the sky. Slowly, he began to smile. "It is not the loss that brings suffering," he whispered to himself, "but the clinging." With calm breath, he stood, tied the remaining sandal to his belt, and began walking barefoot down the road. Each step was slow, careful, mindful. He felt the heat of the ground, the small stones, the cool patches of shade. Instead of resenting the pain, he welcomed it as a teacher. It showed him where he stepped too fast, where he wasn't present. He began to walk not just on the earth, but with the earth. People noticed his gentle movements, his quiet smile, and asked him why he was barefoot. "I lost my sandal," he said. but I found my attention. Moral of the story: loss is not always misfortune. Sometimes it is an invitation to slow down and see what we've been ignoring. When we stop clinging to what is gone, we begin to touch the present moment with tenderness. And in that moment, everything we need is already here. The empty pagoda on the hill. In the quiet outskirts of a forgotten town, there stood an old pagoda on a grassy hill. It was said to be abandoned, its golden roof faded, its doors creaking in the wind. The villagers often passed by it with silent reverence, but none ever entered. Some said it was haunted, others believed it held ancient treasures, but no one truly knew what lay inside. To most, it was just an empty shell from another time. One day, a young seeker named Sati came to the town. He had traveled far in search of a teacher, a sacred text, a sign, anything to answer the ache in his heart. When he asked the villagers where he might find wisdom, they only nodded toward the hill. "There is nothing up there," one man said, "only silence." Another added, "It has stood for 100 years untouched. If you're looking for answers, you won't find them in dust and ruins." Still, Sati climbed the hill. The wind was soft, and the sun cast long, warm shadows through the tall grass. As he reached the pagoda, the wooden door groaned open with just a light touch. Inside, the space was bare. No statues, no scriptures, only emptiness. Dust floated in the sunbeams. The floor was cracked, the walls worn. At first, Sati felt disappointment. He had expected something profound, something sacred. He sat down, frustrated, and stared into the stillness. Minutes passed, then hours. Slowly, the silence began to speak, not in words, but in feeling. There was nothing to distract him here, no symbols to interpret, no people to impress, only breath, only presence. He began to notice the rhythm of his heartbeat, the rise and fall of his breath, the gentle sound of wind brushing the old stone. A deep quiet opened inside him. The questions in his mind faded like fog in morning light. He realized that the pagoda wasn't empty. It was full of space, and in that space he found peace. Sati stayed until the sun dipped behind the hills. He bowed before leaving, not to a statue or shrine, but to the emptiness that had shown him everything. Moral of the story: what seems empty is often full of meaning. In silence and stillness, the mind stops chasing and starts listening. Sometimes the greatest wisdom is not spoken, it is simply felt when we make space for it. The novice who slept in the rain. In a small forest monastery where the trees whispered softly and the earth smelled of wet leaves, a young novice named Tanu arrived to begin his training. He was eager, full of questions, and carried with him high hopes of enlightenment. The older monks welcomed him kindly, offering robes, a bowl, and a place to sleep beneath a small thatched roof near the edge of the forest. One evening, after a long day of meditation and chores, Tanu forgot to roll down the bamboo shutters of his hut. As night fell, heavy rain began to pour. Cold water leaked through the roof, soaking his thin mat and blanket. Wind blew through the cracks, and thunder echoed in the hills. Tanu woke shivering, heart pounding, unsure what to do. He thought of going to the elders, of asking for help, or of finding somewhere dry. But something held him still. His body trembled, but his mind whispered, "Stay. watch, learn. Lying in the wet, uncomfortable silence, he began to feel the drops, not as punishment, but as presence. He watched how the rain touched the floor, how it pooled, how it passed. He listened to the wind howl like a wild chant, and in that vulnerable moment, cold, tired, alone, he saw something clearly. Suffering is not just in the body. It blooms when the mind fights what is happening. But when he stopped resisting the discomfort, something softened. Tanu focused on his breath, and the fear began to fade. He was still wet, still cold. But inside, he felt calm. The storm outside no longer felt like a threat. It was just nature being itself. Just rain doing what rain does. The next morning, the abbot saw the young novice drying his soaked robe by the fire. He asked gently, "Why didn't you come inside or call for help?" Tanu smiled, tired but peaceful, and said, "Because the rain had something to teach me." Moral of the story: peace is not found by escaping discomfort, but by meeting it with awareness. When we stop struggling against what we cannot control, we begin to see the truth of each moment. Even in the coldest rain, there is a lesson waiting to be received. The golden leaf that never fell. In the garden of a remote monastery high in the mountains, there stood an old Bodhi tree that had been growing for generations. Every autumn, its leaves turned golden and fell gently to the earth, covering the ground like a sacred blanket. The monks loved this time of year. It reminded them of impermanence, of how all things rise and pass away. But one year, something strange happened. Among the falling leaves, one single golden leaf remained, clinging to the highest branch. Days passed, then weeks. All the other leaves had fallen, yet this one remained still, unmoving. Young novices would stare up at it curiously. "Why does it not fall?" they asked. The wind came, the rain passed, snow even touched the branch, but the golden leaf stayed. Some monks said it was a miracle, others saw it as a sign. An old, quiet monk named Venerable Deepa remained silent, while others speculated. One morning, a novice approached him and asked, "Venerable Sir, do you think the golden leaf is special?" Deepa smiled, looked up at the branch, and said gently, "Perhaps it is only afraid." The novice frowned. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid to let go," Deepa replied. That night, under the stars, the wind rose once more. The golden leaf trembled. In that trembling, it caught the moonlight. It shone brighter than gold, almost like fire, but still it did not fall. Watching from his small window, Deepa whispered softly, "Even beauty must know when it's time." In the morning, the branch was bare. The leaf had fallen sometime in the night. It lay alone on the earth, resting beside the others, no longer above them, no longer separate, just one of many. The novices went to see it. Strangely, the golden color remained. It had not browned. It looked peaceful, complete. Deepa stood near it, hands folded. "Clinging does not preserve us," he said. "It only delays the peace waiting below." Moral of the story: letting go is not loss. It is freedom. Like the leaf that finally surrenders to the earth, we find rest only when we stop holding on. Fear tells us to cling. Wisdom teaches us to release. And in that release, we return to where we've always belonged. The bowl that refused anger. In a quiet monastery, nestled between mountains and rivers, there lived an old monk known not for his sermons, but for his silence. He owned only one thing of any value, a smooth black alms bowl that had been passed down from teacher to student for generations. It was said that the bowl had never been broken, chipped, or even scratched, though it had been carried through storms, dropped on rocky roads, and used for many years. To others, it seemed like a miracle, but to the monk, it was simply his bowl. One morning, a young traveler arrived at the monastery, frustrated with life and angry at the world. He had wandered for years in search of peace, but found only more questions. Seeing the calmness of the old monk, the traveler grew jealous. "How can you sit so still?" he snapped. "Don't you ever feel anything? Don't you ever get angry?" The old monk smiled and offered tea. The traveler scoffed. He noticed the black bowl resting beside the monk, and, in a moment of spite, kicked it hard across the stone floor. The sound echoed through the hall, but the bowl rolled gently and came to rest without a mark. The old monk did not react, not with surprise, not with sadness, not with blame. He simply looked at the traveler with eyes full of kindness. The traveler shouted, "Why don't you say something? That was your only possession." The monk softly replied, "A bowl cannot be hurt by anger, and neither can a heart that does not hold it." The traveler froze. He looked at the bowl, then at the monk. His anger began to rise again, but this time it had nowhere to land. The monk was not resisting him. He was not defending. He was just present. In the quiet that followed, something inside the traveler cracked, not like a bowl breaking, but like a wall falling. Tears came, not from sadness, but from the weight he had been carrying for so long. No one had ever met his anger with such gentle space. He bowed low, for the first time in his life, not out of guilt, but gratitude. Moral of the story: anger loses its power when it has nothing to feed on. Like a bowl that does not break, the heart that meets aggression with calm becomes unshakable. True strength lies not in resisting force, but in refusing to become it. The bell that rang at dawn without touch. High in the mountains, where clouds drifted softly through temple eaves, stood a small monastery known for its silence. No markets nearby, no roads, just wind, sky, and the sound of breath. In its center hung an old bronze bell suspended between two weathered wooden beams. The monks never touched it. They never struck it. Yet each morning, just before dawn, it would ring, softly, clearly, like the voice of the sky itself. New visitors often thought it was a trick, a hidden string, a device. But those who stayed longer began to feel something deeper. The bell rang not from force, but from stillness. A young monk named Kalya once arrived, curious and restless. He had heard of the bell's mystery and wanted to know its secret. He watched it every morning, hiding nearby in the dark. No one touched it. No wind shook it. And yet, as the sky turned pale with light, it rang again, one clear tone that echoed gently through the trees. Kalya asked the elder monk, "How is this possible? Who rings the bell?" The elder looked at him kindly and said, "The bell rings when the world is ready to listen." Kalya did not understand. He stayed for weeks, then months. He woke earlier, sat longer, breathed deeper. Slowly, the world within him began to quiet. One morning, long before the bell rang, he sat outside in complete stillness. No thoughts, no wishes, just breath, just now. And as the first light of dawn touched the bell, it sang, a sound so pure it felt like it came from inside him, not from the metal. It wasn't just the bell ringing, it was the silence within that had become so deep, so open, that it could finally hear. From then on, Kalya no longer waited for the bell. He simply sat every morning and let the silence do its work. Some days the bell rang, some days it didn't, but the peace always came. Moral of the story: stillness opens us to what cannot be forced. True understanding does not come by grasping, but by waiting with presence. Like the bell that rings without touch, some truths reveal themselves only when the mind becomes quiet enough to receive them. The girl who sat with trees. In a quiet village where the wind always smelled of blossoms and distant rain, there lived a young girl named Amara. She spoke little, laughed softly, and often disappeared for hours at a time. People would find her sitting cross-legged under trees, mango, neem, jackfruit, sometimes with her eyes closed, sometimes just watching the branches sway. She seemed to be waiting for something, but never said what. The villagers didn't understand her. "She's too quiet," they would whisper. "She should be playing, learning, helping more." Some even thought she was strange. But Amara never argued, never explained. She simply returned to the trees. What they didn't know was that Amara had lost her mother young, and her grief had never found words. While others moved on, she had not. The world seemed too loud, too fast, too full of voices that didn't hear her silence. But the trees, they listened, without rushing, without questions, without telling her to smile. One day, a monk passing through the village noticed the girl sitting beneath an old Bodhi tree. Her back was straight, her breathing steady, her gaze soft and full of something ancient. He watched her for a while and then sat beside her. Neither spoke. When the sun began to dip, the monk asked gently, "What do you see when you sit with the trees?" Amara opened her eyes slowly and said, "I don't see. I feel. I feel the roots under me. I feel the wind touch their leaves and mine. I feel my sadness rise and fall like the branches. I don't have to explain anything here." The monk smiled. "Then you have already learned what many forget. The trees do not ask us to be different. They remind us we are not alone, even in silence." From that day, people began to notice something different about Amara. Children started to sit near her under the trees. Even the elders began walking to the grove to rest. No one asked her to speak anymore. Her presence had become its own kind of comfort, its own quiet teaching. Moral of the story: healing does not always come through words. Sometimes peace grows slowly, like trees, when we give ourselves space to feel without judgment. In stillness, we are not alone. Nature reminds us that everything changes, and every breath carries us toward peace. The sleep of Venerable Anuloma. In a secluded monastery deep within the forest, where the nights were long and the moon lit the path between meditation huts, lived an old monk named Venerable Anuloma. He was known not for his teachings or debates, but for something quiet and unusual: his sleep. Every evening, while the other monks continued their chants or sat in still meditation, Anuloma would gently lie down beneath a tree, close his eyes, and fall into a sleep so peaceful it seemed as though the earth itself slowed to breathe with him. His face remained soft, his breath light, and his body utterly still, like a leaf resting on calm water. Some younger monks began to whisper. "He sleeps too early," one said. "He should meditate longer," said another. But no one could deny something strange. Every morning, Anuloma would wake before all others, with a calm so deep it seemed to change the air around him. Flowers near his hut bloomed faster, birds came closer, even restless novices felt steadier when he was near. One curious monk finally asked him, "Venerable sir, how do you sleep so deeply and still wake with such peace?" Anuloma smiled gently, his voice no louder than the wind in the trees. "Because I do not carry myself into sleep. I set myself down." The monk was puzzled. "But we all lie down at night?" Anuloma nodded. "We lie down, but we don't let go. We take our thoughts, our worries, our hopes and fears with us. We clutch the day as we drift into the night. But sleep, true sleep, is a practice of release." He continued, "Each evening I offer the day back to the world. Every word spoken, every breath taken, every feeling felt. I hold nothing. I do not even sleep as a monk. I simply rest as a being, empty and free." That night, the young monk tried what Anuloma described. He let go of his need to be a good student, let go of his doubts and regrets, and instead of falling asleep, he surrendered to it. The sleep that came over him was deep, still, and healing. He did not dream. He simply rested. Moral of the story: peaceful sleep does not come from exhaustion, but from letting go. When we release our grasp on the day and stop carrying our thoughts into night, sleep becomes a gentle return to stillness. True rest begins with surrender, the cloud that bowed to the mountain. In the highlands, where the sky feels close enough to touch, there lived an old mountain that had stood for 1,000 years. It was not the tallest, nor the sharpest, but it was steady, its peaks kissed by snow, its slopes draped in silence. Below it, valleys bloomed and rivers were born. Creatures made their homes in its shadow. It was never proud, never loud. It simply was. One summer, a young cloud drifted into the sky above the land. Light and full of motion, the cloud moved swiftly, shaped by wind and sun. Wherever it passed, it brought cool shade or gentle rain. People and animals looked up and smiled, grateful for its passing. The cloud began to think it was important, needed, even powerful. One day, as it floated over the mountain, the cloud paused. The mountain did not move. It did not change. It simply stood, unmoved by the shadow or the drizzle the cloud offered. The cloud hovered, uncertain. "Why don't you react to me?" it asked. "I bring rain, I give shade. Do I not matter to you?" The mountain was silent for a long time. Then, in a voice as deep as the earth itself, it said, "You are beautiful, cloud. You dance across the sky and feed the rivers. But I do not measure your worth by how you affect me. I have seen many clouds. Some weep, some roar, some pass without a sound. But I remain rooted, watching. That is my nature." The cloud trembled. It had never been seen without being praised or feared. Then, "Am I nothing?" it asked. The mountain replied, "You are what you are. That is enough. You don't need to be praised to have meaning. You don't need to be noticed to exist." The cloud grew quiet. For the first time, it looked not just at the earth below, but into itself. It saw how it had chased approval, how it had rushed to be seen. Slowly, it drifted lower, humbled not by the mountain's words, but by its stillness. That day, the cloud bowed low, releasing soft rain onto the mountain's face. It was not an offering of power, but one of peace. Moral of the story: true strength does not need attention. The deepest presence is quiet and steady. When we stop needing to be seen to feel worthy, we begin to truly exist, with calm, with humility, with grace. The sandalwood smoke of samadhi. In a quiet monastery, nestled among the sandalwood groves of southern India, there lived a monk named Venerable Maitra. He was not known for speaking much, nor did he lead sermons or debates. Instead, he spent his days in silent practice, his hut always surrounded by the soft scent of burning sandalwood. Every morning, after sweeping his tiny space and offering water to the Bodhi tree, he would light a small stick of sandalwood incense, sit cross-legged, and enter deep samadhi, complete meditative absorption. The monks nearby often wondered about him. "He does not teach," they said. "He rarely even chants. He simply sits, and the smoke rises." One day, a wandering novice, troubled by a restless heart and overwhelmed thoughts, came to the monastery seeking peace. He couldn't sleep. His thoughts raced at night. His chest felt heavy each morning. When he asked the abbot what to do, the abbot gently said, "Go and sit outside Maitra's hut. Say nothing, just sit, watch, breathe." The novice obeyed. As the sun began to rise, he found Maitra already seated, eyes closed, unmoving, with a single thin line of sandalwood smoke curling upward like a slow prayer. At first, the novice grew impatient. He wanted answers, mantras, something to do. But the silence stretched, and the smoke drifted upward, soft and fragrant, dissolving into the open air. He began to notice the way the smoke didn't rush. It didn't force its path. It simply rose, danced, and disappeared. His breath began to slow. His thoughts softened. For the first time in many weeks, he felt stillness not as something he had to earn, but as something already present, waiting to be noticed. He returned the next morning, and the next. Each day, he said nothing. He simply sat and watched the incense burn, his mind slowly clearing like fog touched by sun. After many weeks, the novice bowed to Venerable Maitra and whispered, "Thank you for your teachings." Maitra smiled softly, his first words barely a whisper. "Samadhi is like the sandalwood smoke. It cannot be held, only followed." Moral of the story: stillness teaches without words. When we stop grasping and simply observe, the mind settles like incense rising in calm air. True clarity does not come from struggle, but from presence. Like sandalwood smoke, peace drifts gently into the heart when we stop chasing and begin to sit with what is. The cup of stillness. In a distant monastery, high in the misty hills, a young monk named Lilan struggled to calm his restless mind. Each day he tried harder, waking before dawn, sitting longer in meditation, chanting louder, bowing lower. But inside, his thoughts raced like wind through dry leaves. Doubts came and went. His past whispered, the future shouted. He longed for peace, but the more he chased it, the farther it seemed. One morning, while drawing water from the stone well, Leland noticed the abbot sitting alone in the garden, holding a small clay cup filled with tea. The old monk sat so still, so silently, that not even a single ripple disturbed the surface of his drink. Curious, Leland approached and bowed. "Master," he said, "I cannot quiet my mind. I try and try, but it feels louder each day." The abbot looked at him kindly, then lifted the small cup and held it toward Leland. "Stir this," he said softly. Leland gently swirled the cup, and the clear tea became cloudy. The abbot waited, then asked, "Now, without touching it, make it still again." The young monk frowned. "I can't. If I don't touch it, the tea won't stop moving." The abbot nodded. "Exactly. And neither will your mind if you keep stirring it." Leland sat back, the lesson sinking in like sunlight through clouds. The abbot placed the cup on the stone beside him. "Peace comes not by force, but by allowing. Sit, wait, watch." Together they sat in silence. Slowly the tea settled. The leaves floated down, the surface smoothed like glass. Nothing was forced, and yet everything became calm. Leland felt something shift inside him. He had been trying to conquer his mind, to defeat restlessness like an enemy. But now he saw that peace is not a battle. It is a soft return to what's already there, beneath the noise, beneath the trying. From that day forward, Leland stopped chasing silence. He welcomed noise without fear. He sat like the cup, open, steady, still. Moral of the story: the mind becomes calm not when we force it, but when we allow it to settle. Like tea in a quiet cup, stillness arises when we stop stirring. True peace doesn't come from doing more, it comes from letting go. The bird that whispered the precepts. In a quiet valley, where mist clung to the grass at dawn and the river sang softly through the trees, there stood a small monastery with only a few monks. Among them was a young novice named Nanda, kind-hearted but easily distracted. Though he loved the Buddha's teachings, his mind often wandered. During meditation, he would think of songs, dreams, and stories. During chanting, he'd forget the lines. He longed to be focused like the elder monks, but felt ashamed of his restlessness. One afternoon, after a long meditation in which he had barely been still, Nanda left the hall and wandered into the forest behind the monastery. There, in the tall trees near the river's edge, he heard a soft, sweet chirping. He followed the sound and saw a small bird, its feathers grey and white like falling ash, perched on a low branch. The bird tilted its head and, to Nanda's amazement, began repeating gentle, rhythmic words. "Do no harm. Take only what is given. Speak truth. Be clear. Be still." Nanda froze. These were the 5 precepts, the basic trainings every monk takes to heart. But no one had taught the bird. No one had recited them nearby. Yet here they were, drifting from its beak like a prayer. The bird sang again. "Do no harm. Take only what is given. Speak truth." Day after day, Nanda returned. He sat beneath the tree, listening. The bird's voice was soft, never forced, always gentle. With time, the words sank into Nanda's mind, not as rules, but as music. He began to feel the meaning of each line. He became more mindful in the monastery, more present in his steps, more gentle in his actions. One day he asked the abbot, "Venerable sir, there is a bird in the forest that whispers the precepts. Why would a creature of the wild know the path better than I do?" The abbot smiled and replied, "Sometimes nature repeats what we have forgotten. When the mind quiets enough to listen, even a bird can sound like the Buddha." Moral of the story: wisdom is not always found in loud teachings or long texts. Sometimes it comes as a whisper, soft and unexpected. When we listen with a quiet heart, even the smallest voice can awaken us. Truth does not shout, it sings gently to those who are ready to hear. The bamboo staff and the star. In a remote valley where stars could be seen like lanterns scattered across the sky, an old wandering monk named Jaya traveled from village to village with nothing but a simple robe and a long bamboo staff. The staff was smooth from years of walking and worn where his hand had held it day after day. It made no sound on the earth, but its presence seemed to bring comfort wherever he went. Children would gather around him, curious. "Why do you always carry that stick?" they asked. "Does it help you walk? Does it protect you from wild animals?" Jaya would only smile, his eyes crinkling like dry leaves, and reply, "It reminds me of something important." One evening, while resting under an acacia tree, a boy named Arun approached him. Arun was troubled. His father had died the year before, and since then, sleep had not come easily. His dreams were full of sadness. "I look up at the stars every night," he said, "but they feel too far away. I wish they could tell me why life is so hard." Jaya nodded, then lifted his bamboo staff and placed it gently in the boy's hands. "Hold this," he said. "Point it to the brightest star you see." Arun raised the staff to the sky and aimed it at a shimmering light far above. "There," he said. The monk whispered, "Now, listen carefully. That star has been shining for thousands of years. It shines whether you see it or not. It doesn't need to be near to guide you. Your sorrow feels big now, but like this staff pointing to the stars, your pain can remind you to look upward." Arun looked confused. "How can pain help me?" Jaya smiled. "Because pain means you have loved, and love does not end. It simply changes shape. You do not carry sorrow to suffer, but to understand. Like this staff, it supports you on your journey. And like the star, hope remains, even far, even quiet." The boy looked at the sky again, and for the first time in many months, it didn't feel so empty. He gave the staff back to the monk, but Jaya shook his head. "Keep it," he said. "It is not just bamboo now, it points you home." Moral of the story: grief is not a weight to bury us, but a staff to steady our walk. Pain can guide us, like a star in the distance, quiet, constant, and full of light. In carrying it gently, we remember what matters most: love, and the path it leaves behind. The umbrella left by the river. In a small village where the river ran wide and slow, a traveling monk arrived during the rainy season. His name was Venerable Sona, a quiet man with kind eyes and worn sandals. He carried little, only a robe, a bowl, and an old umbrella made of oiled cloth and bamboo. It shaded him from the rain and sun, and he treated it with care, as one might a friend. One afternoon, after giving a teaching beneath a mango tree, Sonar walked to the river to bathe. He folded his umbrella neatly and placed it on the stone steps, letting the cool mist rise around him. Villagers came and went, drawing water and watching the monk in silence. When he finished, Sonar bowed to the river and walked back to the monastery barefoot, smiling gently at the sky. But he did not take his umbrella. It remained there all day, unattended, untouched. Curious children looked at it. A merchant passed by and paused. "Surely he forgot," someone whispered. "Should we return it?" asked another. But no one moved it. Something about the way it was placed, so carefully, so quietly, made them hesitate. The next morning, Venerable Sonar returned to the river, slowly and without worry. He saw the umbrella still there and picked it up gently, dusting off a single fallen leaf. A farmer approached and asked, "Venerable sir, did you not forget your umbrella?" Sonar turned to him with a soft smile. "No," he said, "I left it." "But why?" the farmer asked. Sonar looked at the flowing water and replied, "To see what I still cling to." He explained that he had once been a man who held tightly to possessions, routines, and comfort. Now, when he noticed even a hint of attachment, he practiced letting go. Even a small thing, like an umbrella, he said, can become a chain if we fear losing it. The villagers were quiet. Some lowered their eyes, others nodded slowly. The umbrella, now just an object again, had shown them something invisible. Moral of the story: attachment doesn't begin with large things, it starts in small comforts. When we fear losing even the tiniest possession, we reveal where the mind still clings. Freedom begins by noticing what we cannot leave behind and gently learning how to walk away with peace, the stream that forgot to flow. In a peaceful forest hidden beyond rice fields and soft hills, there was once a small stream that had always flowed with grace. It danced over rocks, whispered through reeds, and sang its quiet song to the birds and trees. The animals drank from it. The monks who meditated nearby would sit by its banks to hear its calming voice. It was not large, but it was alive, full of movement, gentle and steady. But one season, after a long stretch of heat and silence, the stream began to slow. The rains did not come. The wind felt sharp. Fear crept into the heart of the stream. It looked at its dry edges, its shrinking pools, and began to doubt itself. "What if I am disappearing?" it whispered. "What if I was never strong enough? What if I am no longer a stream?" It stopped moving, not because it could not, but because fear made it freeze. The water sat still. The flow it once trusted had turned into hesitation. Days passed, then weeks. Leaves fell into its quiet body. Dust covered its surface. The stream felt forgotten, even by itself. One early morning, an old monk with tired feet arrived and knelt at the edge. He placed his hand in the cool, silent water and smiled. "You are still here," he said softly. "Even if you forget how to flow, your nature remains. Water does not stop being water just because it rests." The stream listened. The monk sat quietly, as if waiting for nothing at all. A breeze moved through the trees. A single drop of dew fell from a branch and rippled across the surface. The stream remembered the feeling of movement. It had not vanished. It had only paused. The pause was not a failure. It was part of its rhythm. A few days later, clouds gathered. A soft rain began to fall, slow at first, then steady. The stream opened itself again, slowly stretching, gently reaching. The forest welcomed its return. But more than that, the stream welcomed itself, not for how it rushed, but for how it remembered. Moral of the story: we all forget our strength sometimes. But even in stillness, we are not lost. Just like the stream, our true nature remains, even in silence, even in doubt. When we stop fearing the pause, we make room for the flow to return. The silent debate. In a remote monastery, high above the clouds, where the wind moved like breath through the pine trees, a group of monks once prepared for a rare and honored event. A visiting scholar from a distant land was coming to challenge their teachings. This scholar was known throughout the region, brilliant, sharp-tongued, unshakable in argument. He had defeated many great minds in public debates and saw the mountain monastery as his next conquest. The monks were anxious. They had no desire to argue, but they could not refuse his request. They gathered to decide who should meet him. Some were wise but timid. Others had learning but not calm. The abbot, after long silence, finally turned to the youngest monk among them, Venerable Chitta. Quiet, soft-spoken, and barely 20, he had never spoken at a debate in his life. "Chitta," the abbot said, "you will meet the scholar." Gasps filled the hall. "But he's never even raised his voice," one whispered. "He'll be torn apart," said another. But Chitta bowed humbly. "I will go." When the day arrived, the villagers gathered, expecting a storm of words. The scholar stood tall, proud, eyes full of challenge. Chitta arrived barefoot, robes clean, face calm as still water. He sat before the scholar and said nothing. The scholar waited. Then, with a puzzled smile, he asked the first question, a complex puzzle about causality and perception. Chitta did not answer. He only met the scholar's eyes and remained still. The scholar asked again, louder this time. Still, Chitta said nothing. A third time, the scholar spoke, this time with frustration. But Chitta did not move. His silence was not avoidance. It was presence, steady, unmoving, a silence that was full, not empty. At first, the crowd murmured, but slowly a hush fell. The tension broke. The scholar's voice quieted. He stared at Chitta, confused, then thoughtful. After several minutes, the scholar stood, folded his palms, and bowed deeply. "I came to win a debate," he said, "but I found something greater than victory." Then he left, walking down the mountain alone, as the monks looked on in awe. Moral of the story: wisdom is not always spoken. True understanding is not proven in argument, but in presence. Silence, when it comes from deep clarity, can calm even the sharpest mind. In stillness, truth needs no defense. It simply is. The dancer who entered emptiness. In a city of noise and color, where drums echoed and incense filled the streets, there lived a dancer named Neela. Her movements were like silk in wind, graceful, flawless, full of life. Crowds would gather in temples and markets just to watch her spin, leap, and bow. When she danced, people said they forgot their troubles. She brought joy, beauty, and wonder. But when the music stopped and the curtains fell, Neela felt something hollow inside. Applause faded. Lights dimmed. Alone in her room, she would sit by her mirror and stare into her own eyes, asking quietly, "Who am I?" when no one is watching. As the years passed, the emptiness grew louder. No matter how many praises she received, they could not fill the quiet ache in her chest. One night, after a performance that ended in thunderous cheers, Neela slipped away from the city and walked toward the mountains, guided by nothing but moonlight and exhaustion. She arrived at a forest monastery and begged the gatekeeper, "Please, let me stay. Not as a dancer, just as someone trying to breathe." The monks welcomed her, asked no questions, and gave her simple robes and silence. She swept floors. She ate in silence. She sat in meditation under fig trees and watched the wind pass through the leaves. There was no stage, no audience, no rhythm to follow, only her breath, her steps, herself. At first, she longed for movement. Her body twitched to dance, but the silence did something to her. It was not empty, it was full of what had always been beneath the music: fear, sadness, longing, beauty. Slowly, her restlessness softened. Her breath became the beat, her posture the performance. No one watched, but she was more present than ever. One dawn, as the sun rose golden behind the hills, she stood under a tree and moved, not for others, not for praise, but simply because the wind moved through her. It was not a dance, it was a prayer. A young monk saw her and said quietly, "You are still a dancer." She smiled. "No," she whispered, "I have entered the space beyond the dance." Moral of the story: when we let go of needing to be seen, we begin to truly see ourselves. Emptiness is not the absence of meaning, it is the quiet space where our truest self returns. In stillness, we become whole. The little monk who followed a firefly. In a village nestled between dark green hills and rice fields that glowed silver in the moonlight, there lived a little novice monk named Pema. He was only 8 years old, small for his age, with wide, curious eyes and a heart that wandered faster than his feet. Though he wore his robe with pride and recited chants with care, Pema often found his mind drifting to clouds, to birds, to stars that blinked like questions in the sky. One evening, after evening chanting had ended and the monastery lights were dim, Pema lay on his mat, unable to sleep. His thoughts were loud, his body restless. He missed his mother's voice, the sound of village drums, the warmth of a familiar hand holding his. Tears welled in his eyes, but he said nothing. He only watched the shadows move across the wall. Just then, a soft flicker of light danced past the open window. A firefly. Its gentle glow blinked once, then again, as it floated through the still night. Without thinking, Pema rose silently, slipped on his sandals, and followed it. Through the garden, past the sleeping trees, across stones cold with dew, the firefly floated on, never rushing, never straying. Pema followed, his breath quiet, his mind finally still. Step by step, something in him softened. The sadness did not disappear, but it loosened its grip, like a hand slowly letting go. Finally, the firefly came to rest on a single blade of tall grass beside the lotus pond. Pema sat down beside it, folded his legs, and simply watched. No thoughts, no past, no future. Just the tiny light blinking in the darkness. He sat until the firefly blinked one last time and disappeared into the night. Pema did not chase it. He only bowed gently, turned, and walked back to his room. The next morning, the elder monk noticed a change. "You seem different today," he said. Pema looked up and smiled. "Last night," he whispered, "the dark wasn't so dark." Moral of the story: even in our loneliest moments, a small light can guide us back to peace. We do not always need answers, only something gentle to follow, something still enough to quiet the storm inside. Sometimes the way forward appears not in brightness, but in a single flicker of calm, the smile of the sleeping ox. In a quiet village where mornings began with the sound of birds and the slow turning of prayer wheels, there lived an old ox named Dawa. He belonged to no one, yet was known by everyone. Farmers let him rest under their trees, children climbed on his back, and monks gave him leftover rice from their bowls. He was slow, gentle, and carried a look of deep stillness in his eyes. Dawa had ploughed many fields in his youth, walked countless dusty roads, and weathered every kind of storm. But now he spent most of his days lying under the same fig tree beside the monastery wall. He hardly moved, but each day someone would notice it. His smile, soft, subtle, always there, even when he slept. Some said it was just the way his face was shaped. Others believed it was something more. One day, a young novice named Rin approached the abbot after morning chants. "Why does the old ox always smile?" he asked. "He does nothing. He just lies there. Isn't that a waste of life?" The abbot looked out at Dawa, resting peacefully in the sun. "Go sit beside him," he said. "Not for a minute. Sit until the wind changes. And don't speak." Rin was confused, but obeyed. He brought a cushion and sat beside the ox, who breathed slowly and deeply, eyes half closed, tail flicking now and then. Hours passed. The world grew quiet. Rin watched Dawa's chest rise and fall, the way his ears twitched at the sound of a fly, the way he simply was. No desire, no regret, no rush. As the wind shifted and cooled the afternoon air, something inside the boy softened. His thoughts slowed, his shoulders relaxed. He felt peaceful without trying to be. The ox stirred slightly and let out a long breath, then smiled again in his sleep. A smile not of amusement, but of contentment, of deep, unmoving ease. Rin returned to the abbot and bowed. "I think I understand now," he said. The abbot nodded. "He has no possessions, no goals, no plans. But he is more awake in his sleep than many are in their busyness." Moral of the story: true peace is not found in constant doing. It is found in deep being. Like the sleeping ox, we can smile not because life is perfect, but because we have stopped struggling against it. Rest is not wasted time. It is wisdom in stillness. The Waking Dream of Venerable Kania. In a stone monastery perched at the edge of the desert, where the sands shimmered like gold under the sun, there lived a monk known as Venerable Kania. She was respected for her calm presence, her gentle speech, and the way she walked, as if the earth beneath her feet whispered secrets only she could hear. But she carried with her something others could not see, a dream that returned to her every night as steady as breath. In this dream, she stood in a field of white lotus flowers under a sky that never ended. Voices called to her, soft as wind, saying things she could never remember upon waking. Though peaceful, the dream always left her with an ache she could not name, like remembering someone you loved but had forgotten. One morning, after years of the same dream, Kanya woke before dawn, her heart heavy and full of longing. She left her hut and sat beneath the fig tree, eyes open, but seeing nothing of the world around her. A novice approached quietly and asked, "Venerable, are you troubled?" Kanya nodded. "I have seen the same dream for many years, always calm, always silent, yet it leaves me feeling like I'm missing something real." The novice, unsure of what to say, simply sat beside her. The sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Then Kanya closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to listen, not to dream, but to breathe. As she sat, the sounds of the world entered her awareness, the rustle of leaves, the cry of a crow, the crackle of wood as the fire was lit in the kitchen. She didn't drift away, she remained. And for the first time, the ache of the dream melted, not because it left her, but because she met it fully, awake. She realized then that the dream had never been about another world. It was a message, waiting patiently to be understood. Peace does not live in sleep or memory or longing. It lives here, in the breath, in the moment you stop searching. She opened her eyes. The sky was soft with morning. The novice looked at her and said, "You seem lighter." She nodded. "I have stopped dreaming and started seeing." Moral of the story: longing often hides in the stories we tell ourselves. But awakening does not come from escaping the world. It comes from entering it fully. When we stop chasing peace like a dream, we find that it has always been awake, waiting within us. The frog that heard the sutra. Long ago, in a forest where monks gathered to chant beneath tall trees, there lived a small green frog who made his home near a lotus pond beside the monastery. Every morning, the sound of gongs would echo through the misty air, followed by voices chanting ancient words, verses of compassion, impermanence, and peace. The frog didn't understand the meaning of the sounds, but each day he sat still near the edge of the pond, his throat quiet, listening. The other animals paid no attention. Birds flew past, insects buzzed by. But the frog came faithfully, always returning to the same stone as the monks chanted the sutras. His eyes would slowly close, and his breath would slow, as if he too had entered some kind of meditation. One day, during a large festival, many visitors came to the monastery. The monks chanted louder, the prayers lasting longer. The frog, as always, sat in his usual place. But in the middle of the chant, a young boy, unaware, stepped backward near the pond and accidentally crushed the small frog beneath his heel. The chanting stopped. A hush fell over the crowd. The head monk came forward, looked down at the lifeless frog, and gently lifted its body in his hands. Holding it close to his heart, he whispered, "This small one has been listening to the Dharma for many years. May his journey now continue in peace." Later that evening, as the monks sat in meditation, the head monk shared a story. Not all who listen need to understand. Not all who hear need to speak. This frog came with no questions, no ego, no desire for recognition, yet he showed greater stillness than many of us. Who is to say what seeds the Dharma planted in his heart? That night, the monks chanted again, this time dedicating the prayers to all beings who listen quietly, who sit with presence, even in forms others might overlook. And though the frog was gone, the stone where he had always sat remained untouched. It became known as the listener's stone, and over time people came to sit there, not to ask, not to speak, but to simply listen. Moral of the story: true wisdom is not always in knowing, but in listening with a quiet heart. Even without understanding, presence itself becomes a path. Stillness and sincerity carry us closer to truth than words alone ever could. The boy with a bowl of snow. In a mountain village blanketed with winter, where the roofs sagged beneath thick layers of snow and the rivers slept beneath ice, lived a boy named Tashi. He was poor, his clothes thin and patched, and he owned almost nothing except a wooden bowl carved by his late father. The village monastery often gave warm food to those in need, and every morning Tashi would walk barefoot through the snow with his empty bowl cradled carefully in his arms, hoping for a little rice or soup. One morning, after a night of heavy snowfall, Tashi arrived late. The kitchen fires were already cooling, and the monks had given out the last of the food. The cook looked at him with kind but tired eyes. "I'm sorry, little one," he said. "There is nothing left." Tashi nodded and smiled, though his belly ached. "Thank you anyway," he said gently, and turned to leave. On his way home, he passed a clearing where snow fell in soft, endless silence. He sat down on a stone, too tired to walk further, and gazed into the white stillness. Then, without thinking, he scooped fresh snow into his bowl until it was full and held it in his lap. He watched it slowly melt, steam rising into the cold air. He didn't eat it. He didn't complain. He simply sat with it, the bowl of snow, the ache of hunger, the softness of the moment. Unseen by him, an old monk from the monastery had followed at a distance. Curious about the boy's kindness, he had watched Tashi thank them, even when he had nothing. Now, seeing the boy sitting calmly with a bowl of snow, something stirred in the monk's heart. Later that evening, the monk returned with a warm blanket, a bag of rice, and a small note. He placed it gently beside the sleeping boy and bowed low. The note read, "To hold emptiness without bitterness is the beginning of true wealth." Moral of the story: gratitude in moments of lack is the seed of great abundance. When we learn to hold emptiness without anger and to sit with what is instead of what's missing, we invite compassion, not only from within, but from the world around us. Even a bowl of snow can warm the heart when carried with peace. The robe that dried without sun. In the lush highlands where the clouds touched the hills like slow-moving dreams, there lived a monk named Thera who kept mostly to himself. He wasn't known for great sermons or bold teachings. He was quiet, steady, and often seen walking alone through the forest trails or sitting by the river with his eyes closed, listening to the water speak in its soft, ancient way. Thera owned little, just a single ochre robe, worn thin but clean. One rainy season, the clouds hung low for weeks. Rain fell each day, soaking the land, flooding the roots of trees and turning paths into streams. The monastery laundry lines hung heavy with wet robes. The novices grumbled as they struggled to dry their clothes. But each morning, Thera's robe was dry, perfectly dry, without ever being seen on the line. One curious novice, unsure whether it was a trick or miracle, finally asked, "Bhante, how does your robe stay dry without the sun? Do you have a secret place?" Thera smiled gently, his face like calm water. "I wear it," he said. The novice blinked. "But how can it dry while you wear it? It must feel cold, uncomfortable." Thera looked out toward the trees and answered softly, "Only if I resist it. The robe is wet, and so I feel wetness. The wind is cold, so I feel cold. But I do not wish for the sun while the clouds are here. When the robe is wet, it dries slowly, on its own time. I simply remain with it." The novice stood in silence, unsure whether he understood. That evening, he watched Thera walk slowly under the dripping trees, his soaked robe clinging to his body, his steps as calm as if the sun were shining. There was no rush in him, no pushing away of the rain, no longing for warmth. He moved with what was, not what should be. The next morning, his robe was dry. From then on, the novice stopped complaining. He wore his wet robe and began to listen to the rain instead of cursing it. Somehow, it felt less heavy. Moral of the story: peace does not come from changing the weather, but from changing our way of being with it. When we stop resisting what is, discomfort becomes gentleness. Even in the cold and wet, we can be at ease if we choose to walk with the rain instead of against it. The shadow that showed the path. In a land where the sun burned bright and the desert stretched for days, a wandering monk named Pema traveled alone, carrying only a bowl, a prayer shawl, and a deep ache in his chest. He had studied countless sutras, listened to many teachers, and meditated under trees and stars. Yet something still felt missing, an unease that followed him like a shadow he could not escape. One afternoon, as he walked across a quiet plain, the sun cast his shadow long before him. It stretched across the sand, always one step ahead, never quite touching him. Pema stopped and stared at it. The shape of his own body, dark against the golden light, flickered with each movement. Suddenly, he felt frustrated. "Even in silence," he muttered, "I cannot be alone. This shadow clings to me. I don't want it anymore." He turned quickly to face the opposite direction, hoping to leave it behind, but it followed. No matter which way he walked, it was always there, behind him, beside him, beneath him. The more he tried to escape it, the more it seemed to stay. Eventually, exhausted, he sank to the ground. The heat of the sun pulsed against his skin, his breath slowed, and in the stillness, something inside him softened. He looked again at the shadow, no longer with anger but with curiosity. It wasn't chasing him, it wasn't speaking, it simply was, a quiet reflection shaped by light. He realized then the shadow was not an enemy. It was not a burden. It was a part of him. It moved because he moved. It existed only because there was light behind him. Tears welled up, not from sorrow, but from relief. The unease he had carried for so long, the fear, the doubt, the old wounds, had been his shadow. He had tried to outrun it, to deny it, to meditate it away, but peace didn't come from escaping it. Peace came from turning toward it. Pema stood, eyes clear, heart still. This time he walked not to get away, but to walk with his shadow, step by step, breath by breath, in the light that made it possible. Moral of the story: the parts of ourselves we try to run from often carry the most truth. Like a shadow cast by light, our pain only asks to be seen, not feared. When we stop running from what we carry, we begin to walk the path with honesty, and that is where healing begins. The Blind Elder's Last Gatha. In a quiet corner of a monastery tucked deep in the forest, there lived an elder monk named Vimalananda. He had been blind for many years, his eyes clouded like morning mist. Yet his presence shone brighter than any candle in the hall. Though he no longer saw forms, he could sense the smallest tremble in a novice's voice, the quiet shift of emotion in a room, the unspoken suffering in someone's breath. He had not taught formal teachings in years, but the younger monks often sat near him, drawn to the soft stillness he carried. He would simply listen and sometimes hum ancient gathas, short verses of wisdom from memory. His voice was low, slow, and carried something beyond words, as if the verses had grown roots in his bones. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the trees and the birds grew quiet, the elder called for a scribe. His breath had grown shallow and his body thin like dry leaves, but his voice still held the strength of clarity. "I would like to leave behind one last gatha," he said softly, "not for the wise, but for the tired." The scribe nodded and prepared his brush. Vimalananda sat upright on his mat. Though he could not see the ink or the paper, his inner vision was clear. He whispered, "I do not fear the night, for I have walked without eyes. The path is not lit by light, but by the heart that no longer runs." A silence followed, not heavy, but full. The kind of silence that doesn't demand anything, because everything has already been said. He smiled gently and laid back on his mat, folding his hands across his chest. "Let this be my leaving," he whispered, "not in sorrow, but in knowing." He did not speak again. The monks chanted through the night. Some wept, not from grief, but from the sudden realization that even blindness can lead to the clearest sight, that even the last breath can be a teaching. The gatha was carved on a small stone and placed beneath the Bodhi tree in the garden. Many came not to read it, but simply to sit beside it, hoping to feel what he had seen without eyes. Moral of the story: clarity does not come from the eyes, but from a heart that stops running from itself. True wisdom often speaks in silence. When we no longer need to escape the dark, we begin to see the light that was always within. The Monastery of Echoes. High in the fog-wrapped cliffs, where clouds brushed the earth and birds flew below your feet, there stood an ancient monastery known only as the Monastery of Echoes. Few had visited it, and fewer still had stayed. Its walls were worn smooth by wind, and its bells rarely rang, but those who lived there said the air itself could speak, if one was quiet enough to hear. A young monk named Soren arrived there one silent morning, seeking answers. He had grown weary of the world's noise, arguments, demands, expectations. His heart was heavy, his mind cluttered with voices, parents, teachers, even his own. Nothing ever felt truly still. The head monk, an old man whose robes looked nearly part of the stone, welcomed him with a nod. "Here "We speak little," he said softly, "but you will hear much." At first, Soren struggled with the silence. He longed to ask questions, to express his confusion, but no one spoke unless needed. Meals were taken in silence, prayers were whispered, footsteps were soft. Days passed, then weeks. Slowly, he began to notice things he'd never noticed before. One morning, he sat near the edge of a stone corridor and whispered aloud, "Who am I, really?" His voice bounced off the walls, returning not as an answer, but as a question. "Who am I, really?" The echo startled him. It wasn't just a sound. It felt like the monastery itself was asking. It felt like the mountain was holding a mirror to his soul. That night, Soren asked another question. "Why do I feel lost?" The stone replied gently, "Why do I feel lost?" Each word he spoke returned to him, not exactly as he said it, but deeper, more personal. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt alive, like the walls had heard every sorrow, every joy, every doubt ever spoken in their presence. One day, he whispered nothing at all, and even the silence echoed back a feeling he couldn't explain. Stillness became his answer. He never got the explanations he once thought he needed, but in that place, with no teachers and no lectures, he learned to listen not for replies, but for reflection. Moral of the story: the world doesn't always speak with words. In silence, we hear our own hearts more clearly. Echoes do not give us answers. They return our questions so we can hear them fully. And when we truly listen, we begin to understand ourselves. The wind that chanted the Vinaya. Far beyond the edge of villages and roads, nestled deep in a forest where even birds sang softly, there stood an ancient wooden hall known only to the monks who kept it. It was a place of silence, simplicity, and devotion. Here the Vinaya, the sacred code of discipline, was chanted each full moon, passed down word by word, breath by breath, for generations. One season, the monastery became nearly empty. Many of the elder monks had passed into final peace, and the younger ones had gone down to the cities to teach. Only one monk remained, an old bhikkhu named Sivananda, whose voice had once thundered across the hall in perfect rhythm. But now his back was bent, and his voice was thin as smoke. Still, each full moon he lit the lamp, bowed to the altar, and sat to chant the Vinaya. He spoke each word with care, though no one else sat beside him. His voice was no longer strong, but his heart was. One night, as he began the first stanza, a sudden gust of wind blew through the wooden beams, carrying dry leaves across the stone floor. The flames flickered, the scrolls rustled, and for a moment, Sivananda paused. But then, something remarkable happened. The wind moved through the hall, not wildly, but rhythmically, rising and falling with a strange, gentle sound. As he chanted, the wind answered, not with words, but with breath. It carried his syllables farther, like a second voice echoing through the wood and stone. The hall, once silent and empty, began to feel full again, not with people, but with presence. Sivananda did not stop. He kept chanting, tears forming in his clouded eyes. It was as if the forest itself had come to listen, to respond, to remember. When the final verse ended, the wind stilled. The flame stood tall. The leaves rested at his feet like silent witnesses. From that night on, the old monk never felt alone. Even as his voice weakened more, the wind continued to return, gentle, steady, always on the full moon. The monks who returned years later found the old hall filled with quiet peace, and the stories of the chanting wind were passed on, not as a miracle, but as a reminder. Moral of the story: even when we feel alone, the world listens. Discipline and devotion need no audience. When the heart is pure, even the wind will rise to meet its truth. What we offer sincerely never disappears. It becomes part of everything: the candle and the falling petal. In a quiet meditation hall, nestled in a valley where cherry blossoms drifted like snow, a single candle was lit each evening at dusk. It stood alone at the front of the room, its flame steady and warm, casting soft light on the faces of monks who sat cross-legged in silence. Among them was a novice named Kavi. Young and eager, he struggled with his emotions: restlessness, sorrow, fear of not being enough. Each evening, as the candle flickered before him, he would try to still his thoughts, to force his breath to be calm. But inside, waves of feeling rose and crashed again and again. One evening, Kavi noticed something different. As the candle glowed, a soft breeze floated through the open window. A single cherry blossom petal, carried by the wind, drifted down from the tree outside. It spun slowly, gracefully, like a whisper in the air. Kavi watched it fall, watched how it did not resist, did not rush. The petal landed gently on the flame. For a moment, the flame danced wildly. Then it stilled again. The petal didn't destroy the light. It didn't snuff it out. It became part of its dance. Kavi felt his breath catch. For so long, he had tried to push his emotions away, afraid they would extinguish his inner peace. But the candle showed him something else. The falling petal, like sadness, like fear, was not an enemy. It was simply a part of the wind, a part of the moment. And the flame, his awareness, could hold it without burning out. The candle still glowed. The petal lay gently at its base. Nothing was broken. Nothing was wrong. Tears welled in Kavi's eyes, not from pain, but from a quiet understanding he had never felt before. He didn't need to be empty to be at peace. He only needed to allow things to fall as they must, without fear. That night, he bowed more deeply than ever, not to the candle, but to the lesson it offered in silence. Moral of the story: peace is not the absence of emotion. It is the space where emotions are allowed to land gently. Like a candle holding a falling petal, our inner light need not fear what comes. True calm is not untouched by life. It embraces it with grace. The monk who listened to stars. In a desert monastery where sand whispered across stone and the nights stretched long and silent, lived a monk named Revata. He was quiet, even among the quiet, choosing the farthest kuti on the edge of the grounds, where no bells rang and no footsteps passed. He spoke little, ate less, and spent most of his nights outside, not sleeping, but sitting beneath the sky, looking upward as though the stars were saying something only he could hear. Other monks sometimes watched from a distance. Why does he sit so long in the cold, they would wonder. He doesn't chant, he doesn't teach, he just stares at the stars. But Revata had not always been a monk. Before the robe, he had been a man of great sorrow. He had lost more than most people could name: a child, a love, a home. The night sky had been his only companion when no comfort could be found. And over time, its silence became something more than empty space. One evening, a young novice named Sura approached. He had been restless for many weeks. His mind buzzed with thoughts he could not control, questions he could not answer. He had tried everything: chanting, breathing, walking meditation, but still the noise would not leave him. He saw Revata sitting alone under the stars and, after some hesitation, sat beside him. They did not speak for a long time. Finally the boy asked, "Bhante, what do you hear up there?" Revata smiled softly. "Nothing and everything." Sura frowned. "But how can silence say anything?" The old monk replied, "Because silence is the only thing that doesn't try to convince you. It doesn't chase or push or pull. It waits, and in that waiting, something inside you begins to soften. Then, what needs to be heard is heard." Sura looked up. The stars seemed still, but alive. He sat longer than he ever had before, just breathing, watching. No answers came, no great insights, but something in his chest felt wider, less tight. He began to return each night, not to solve his problems, but to let them rest. Moral of the story: sometimes the deepest teachings come without words. When we stop trying to force clarity and simply sit with the vastness of what is, peace begins to rise on its own, quiet, vast, and steady as the stars. The seed that waited 100 years. In a forgotten garden, beyond the edge of any map, buried beneath soil untouched by hands, there rested a seed. It was not large, not golden, not magical in any way. It was simple, small, quiet, and alone. No one planted it with care. No gardener knew it was there. And still, it waited. Seasons passed. Rain fell. Sun warmed the surface. Snow came and left. Trees around it grew tall, dropped their leaves, and withered. Generations of flowers bloomed and faded. Birds nested and moved on. But the seed remained beneath the earth, unmoving, unseen. Some might say it had been forgotten. Others might say it had failed. But inside the seed, there was no anger, no rush, no fear, only stillness. And a deep knowing: not yet, not now. 100 years passed. One spring morning, something changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand. It was a subtle warmth that touched the soil in a way it never had before. The seed felt it, not with thought, but with presence. It did not hesitate. It did not question. It simply began to open. Tiny roots stretched downward. A thin shoot reached for the light. It broke through the surface like a whisper, slow, patient, alive. Villagers who wandered into the abandoned garden noticed the new green sprout. "Strange," they said. "There hasn't been growth here for a lifetime." Some doubted it would survive, others didn't notice at all. But the little seed, now a sapling, did not grow for praise. It grew because the time was finally right. As years passed, the sapling became a tree. Its leaves gave shade, its fruit fed birds. Children rested under its branches. No one knew its age. No one knew how long it had waited. But the tree remembered. And it didn't need to speak. Moral of the story: not all growth is immediate. Some things, like healing, understanding, or purpose, take time, deep time. Just because something is quiet doesn't mean it is lost. Like the seed that waited 100 years, your moment will come. And when it does, no force will be needed, only readiness and the gentle unfolding of who you already are. The wandering bhikkhuni and the lute. Long ago, when the forests were still thick with silence and the moon shone like a lamp for the lost, there lived a wandering bhikkhuni named Sela. She walked alone from village to village, her robe patched, her bowl worn smooth, carrying only one unusual item, a small wooden lute slung across her back. In every place she passed, people whispered, "She's not a real nun," they said. "A bhikkhuni should not play music." Others said she was mad, that her songs had no meaning. But Sela never argued. She would simply bow, sit under a tree, and when the sun sank low, she would play. Not for the crowds, not for attention, just quiet notes, soft as falling leaves. Children would gather first, then elders, then even the skeptical ones, drawn not by the sound alone, but by the way she played, as if every string held sorrow, as if each pause carried peace. One evening, in a village shadowed by illness and grief, Sela arrived to find silence heavier than usual. Many had died that month, and the rest moved like ghosts. She sat beneath a neem tree and began to play, slow, broken notes, like a heart speaking gently for the first time. A man cried openly for the wife he had not buried. A mother wept for her child. No words were spoken, but somehow all were heard. The music wasn't happy. It wasn't sad. It was real. And it made room for everything that had been held too tightly for too long. Afterward, a monk approached her, robes sharp, voice stern. "Sister," he said, "the Vinaya speaks clearly. Entertainment leads to attachment. Why do you carry this lute?" Sela looked at him with eyes calm as still water. She placed the lute in his hands and said, "Strings only bind when they are tightened without wisdom, but when tuned just right, they can free what words cannot." She bowed and walked on into the night, her bare feet touching the earth like prayers. No one ever knew where she came from. No one ever knew where she went. But where she played, grief softened and silence became healing. Moral of the story: compassion takes many forms. What may look like defiance can be deep service. When intention is pure, even a simple song can open the heart. Sometimes healing doesn't come through silence, but through a voice that dares to feel. The cat who slept in lotus pose. In a small village monastery shaded by tall banyan trees, there lived a temple cat named Tika. She had soft grey fur, quiet paws, and a habit that made her famous among the monks. Each day, as the bell rang for evening meditation, Tika would silently enter the hall, circle once, and then curl into a perfect lotus pose beside the abbot, her tail wrapped neatly around her body, her eyes half closed, breathing slow and steady. The monks found it amusing at first. "Look at her," they whispered. "Even the cat knows how to meditate." But over time, they began to notice something deeper. While their own minds wandered, thinking of chores, meals, old regrets, Tika remained still. Entire sessions would pass, and she would not move. No twitch, no fidget, no sigh, just presence. One novice, still new to practice, became frustrated. "Why can't I sit like the cat?" he asked one morning. "My back aches, my thoughts won't stop, and every sound pulls me away." She just sits there like she's already enlightened. The abbot smiled gently. "Perhaps that's not the right question," he said. "Ask instead, what is she not doing?" The novice blinked. "She's not trying." "Exactly," the abbot said. "She isn't trying to be still. She is still. She doesn't chase silence. She simply rests in it." That evening, the novice watched Tika more closely. He noticed her breath, soft, unforced. He noticed how she didn't resist the sounds around her: a coughing monk, a creaking floorboard, a distant dog's bark. She simply remained, like a stone in a calm river. The novice exhaled, lowered his shoulders, and let go of the fight to get it right. He just sat, like the cat. Time passed. The bell rang. The session ended. Tika stretched, yawned, and walked out without ceremony. But something in the novice had changed. From that day on, when meditation felt hard, he remembered Tika, her ease, her presence, her quiet reminder that peace doesn't need to be earned. It only needs to be allowed. Moral of the story: stillness doesn't come from effort. It comes from surrender. Like the cat in lotus pose, peace arises when we stop trying to become something and simply rest in what we already are. Presence is not a goal. It is a return. The deer that bowed 3 times. In a forest untouched by roads or fire, where the trees grew tall like guardians of silence, lived a deer unlike any other. She was graceful and slender, with fur like golden grass, and eyes that held something almost human, gentle, alert, and deeply still. The forest dwellers called her Shanti, for she moved without fear, and wherever she went, calm followed. Hunters from nearby villages had often tried to catch her, drawn by the legend of a deer that never fled. But arrows missed her, traps never held. It was said that even the wind parted for her hooves. Still, Shanti harmed no one. She grazed in peace, shared waterholes with smaller animals, and sometimes simply stood under trees as if she were listening to the earth itself. One dry season, a great famine came. Rivers thinned, leaves withered. The animals became desperate, fighting over scraps. Fear rose like smoke through the forest. Even the monks who lived in a small hermitage nearby began to worry, their bowls returning emptier each day. One morning, as the sun stretched across the brittle grass, Shanti walked directly into the monk's garden. She did not sneak or run. She walked as if she belonged there, her head held low, her eyes soft. The monks gathered in wonder, unsure of what to do. Then the deer did something no one expected. She bowed, once, twice, 3 times, slowly, silently, with the grace of someone offering their very breath. She then lay down beside the gate and did not move. The elder monk, tears gathering in his eyes, whispered, "She offers herself." But no one touched her. Instead, the elder fell to his knees and bowed back 3 times. "We cannot take what is given in innocence," he said. "Her offering is not of flesh, but of example." The monks chose to fast that day and the next. Inspired by the deer's stillness, their fear began to loosen its grip. Something shifted, not outside, but within, And as their hearts softened, the village hearts did too. Bowls filled again, not just with food, but with kindness. Shanti rose at dawn and walked back into the forest. She was never seen again, but her bow remained, in every act of quiet courage that followed. Moral of the story: true sacrifice is not loud or bloody. It is a gesture of pure heart. When we give without fear, we awaken something ancient in others. Even the quietest bow can shake the world. The hand that poured tea in silence. In a small Zen temple nestled at the edge of a mountain forest, the days were marked not by clocks, but by rituals, gentle, steady, repeated with care. Of them all, the afternoon tea ceremony was the quietest. No words were spoken, no instructions were given. The monks would sit in a circle as the eldest nun, Venerable Hana, would pour the tea. She never hurried. She never hesitated. Each movement, from lifting the pot to tilting it to resting it back down, was like watching a breath. The tea flowed in a gentle arc, never spilling, never stopping short. The fragrance rose like a prayer. One day, a young monk named Tenji, full of questions and restlessness, could no longer contain his thoughts. As the tea was being poured, he whispered, "Venerable Hana, what is the meaning of enlightenment?" She did not look up. She did not respond. She simply continued pouring, one cup, then the next. Tenji frowned, his face hot with impatience. Maybe she didn't hear me, he thought. "Venerable?" he asked again, louder this time. "I want to understand. I've read the sutras. I've meditated for months, but I still don't feel it." The nun looked at him softly, her eyes neither stern nor kind, just clear. She picked up his cup. The pot was now nearly empty. She tilted it gently. A single drop of tea fell into his cup. Just one. Then she set it down. The room was silent. Tenji stared at the drop. His heart slowed. He understood. That one drop held everything. The care of her hand, the silence of the room, the years of practice that shaped a moment so small. Enlightenment wasn't something to be seized. It was already present, in stillness, in service, in silence. Not in the answer, but in the act. After that day, Tenji stopped searching for great signs. He listened more. He moved slower. And once, many years later, he too poured tea in silence for another restless monk. He gave them one perfect drop. Moral of the story: wisdom does not always come through words. It flows through presence, through simple acts done with full awareness. Like a hand that pours tea in silence, the deepest truths are found not in explanations, but in how we hold the moment. The vase that taught patience. In a village wrapped in rice fields and soft morning mist, there was a temple known for its beauty. Inside its main hall stood a single blue-glazed vase, tall, slender, and perfect. It rested on a simple altar, not adorned with flowers or gold, but left empty, still, complete. Visitors often paused before it, struck by its quiet elegance, but most never knew its story. Years ago, the vase had begun as a lump of stubborn clay, dug from the riverbank by a young potter named Anu. She was still new to her craft and full of ambition. The first time she shaped the clay, it collapsed. The second time, it cracked. The third time, it hardened unevenly. Each time it failed, Her frustration grew louder than her breath. "Why won't it take the form I want?" she shouted one night, throwing the ruined clay into the fire. An old monk who lived nearby heard her cries and came to watch her work the next morning. She worked fast, her movements sharp, her hands tense. "You are shaping it too quickly," he said gently. "The clay doesn't trust you yet." Anu frowned. "It's clay. It doesn't have a mind." The monk smiled. "Everything responds to how it's touched." He handed her a cup of water. "Soften it. Wait. Try again." Reluctantly, she followed his advice. She let the clay rest overnight. She slowed her breath. She returned with different hands, gentler, more curious. Days turned to weeks. Each time she failed, she learned to listen more. She felt the clay instead of forcing it. She began to see that the vase wasn't something she made, but something revealed, slowly, when she was ready. When the vase was finally shaped, she waited again, through the long silence of the kiln, the slow rise of heat, the quiet hope that it wouldn't shatter. And when it emerged whole, glowing with a deep ocean blue glaze, she didn't feel pride. She felt gratitude. The vase had taught her what no teacher could: patience, softness, surrender. She gave it to the temple, not as art, but as offering. And for decades, it stood in silence, showing others what it had shown her. Moral of the story: growth cannot be rushed. Like clay, we shape only when we learn to wait, to feel, to try again with softer hands. Patience is not weakness. It is trust in the process that transforms us. The cloud that circled the stupa. In a quiet valley, hidden between mountains and sky, there stood an old stone stupa, cracked with age, worn smooth by centuries of wind and prayer. Pilgrims came from far away to walk around it in silence, circling again and again with heads bowed, hands folded, hearts heavy with longing. It was said that walking the stupa could calm any sorrow, if done with a clear mind. One morning, as the sun began to rise, a single white cloud drifted across the sky, slow and low. It hovered above the valley, drawn not by wind, but by something gentler, something deep and still. The cloud moved closer to the stupa, casting a soft shadow across the stone. Then, with no urgency at all, it began to circle. A young monk standing at the temple gate looked up and gasped. He watched the cloud, round and full, floating slowly, once, then twice, then again, around the sacred monument, just as the pilgrims did. It made no sound, it left no trace. But the sight of it brought tears to his eyes. He ran to the abbot and pointed to the sky. "Look, even the cloud is paying respect." The abbot stepped out, gazed upward, and smiled with the quiet joy of someone who had seen many things but was still capable of wonder. "Not paying respect," he whispered. "Becoming it." The young monk blinked. "What do you mean?" The abbot placed a hand on his shoulder. "The cloud is not trying to be holy. It simply moves with the wind. It drifts where it's drawn. And yet, in its stillness, in its softness, it has become part of this moment of devotion. No effort, no intention, just presence." The cloud made its final turn, then drifted onward, slowly dissolving into the blue. But the image remained. For days, the monks and pilgrims alike walked more slowly, more gently, as if remembering that even a cloud could become part of the path. Moral of the story: true reverence does not come from striving, but from presence. Like a cloud circling a stupa, peace is found not in effort or control, but in moving with stillness and offering ourselves fully to the moment. In simply being, we already belong. The lantern that lit by kindness. In a small mountain village where the nights were long and stars hid behind heavy clouds, there stood a humble temple built from weathered stone and warm wood. Inside it hung an old paper lantern, delicate and pale, suspended from the ceiling by a faded red cord. It had no flame. It had not glowed in many years. The villagers had forgotten why it was there, and most believed it was broken. Yet each morning the monks cleaned around it gently. They never took it down. They never replaced it. When asked why, the old abbot would simply say, "It waits for the right light." No one understood what he meant. One bitter winter, a great storm swept through the mountains. Roads were buried, homes were damaged, and food grew scarce. People grew cold, tired, frightened. One night, a young orphan named Luma, who had lost her family to illness, came to the temple. She had no shoes, no coat, only a tattered shawl and trembling hands. The monks welcomed her with warm broth and a dry blanket. One monk gave her his own robe to sleep in. Another knelt to wash her feet. No one asked where she came from. No one tried to explain suffering. They simply cared for her, gently, without hesitation. That night, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled low, something stirred in the temple's main hall. The paper lantern began to glow. Soft at first, like breath on glass. Then warmer, steadier, until it filled the room with a golden light that reached every corner. The monks gathered, silent in wonder. Luma sat beneath it, wide-eyed, her small face illuminated with something that looked like peace. The villagers came running, thinking it was a trick or miracle. But there were no candles, no oil, no fire, just the lantern glowing on its own. The abbot smiled, his eyes wet with quiet joy. "The light," he said, "does not come from flame. It comes from kindness given without asking anything back." From that day on, the lantern would glow, not every night, but whenever someone gave from the heart, a bowl of rice to a stranger, a blanket to the sick, a hand offered in silence. Moral of the story: the brightest light is not made by fire, but by love without condition. Kindness given in stillness becomes its own source of warmth. Even in the darkest places, compassion can turn emptiness into light. The muddy robe and the clear mind. In a remote monastery where the path to the gates turned to thick mud during the rainy season, a young monk named Ketu struggled with his thoughts. He had taken his vows only months earlier, but already he felt burdened. He wanted to do everything right, speak purely, think clearly, walk gently, but each day he found himself irritated, distracted, or ashamed of his mistakes. He longed to be pure, but his mind felt like a stormy river. One morning, after a long night of rain, Ketu was assigned to bring water from the well at the foot of the hill. The trail was slippery, and his sandals sank deep into the earth. His robe dragged in the mud, and despite his best efforts, he returned covered in stains. As he entered the main hall, the older monks looked up. Some smiled, one chuckled softly. Embarrassed, Ketu bowed quickly and turned to leave, but the abbot called him back. "Ketu," the abbot said kindly, "do not be ashamed of mud." Ketu lowered his eyes. "But Bhante, I've soiled my robe. I should have been more careful. I'm supposed to be practicing mindfulness, but I was clumsy." The abbot stood and walked over, placing a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Come," he said, guiding him to the lotus pond behind the hall. The water was calm, the surface still. The abbot pointed to the reflection of the sky. "Do you see how clearly the sky rests on the surface?" Ketu nodded. "Now stir the water." He did, and the image vanished. Just ripples and broken light remained. "This," the abbot said, "is what happens when we resist what is. Your robe is muddy, so is the ground. This is the world. But your mind, your awareness, can still be clear. Purity isn't about never being touched by mud. It's about not letting the mud cloud your seeing." Ketu stood quietly, watching the pond settle once more. Later, he washed his robe, not in shame, but in peace. And from that day forward, he walked the muddy paths without fear, because his steps, even when messy, were full of presence. Moral of the story: peace is not found in staying clean, but in staying clear. A muddy robe does not soil a clear mind. When we stop fighting life's messes and meet them with stillness, we begin to walk truly, untouched in the midst of it all. The bamboo that watched the moon. In a quiet grove beyond the edge of a monastery, where wind whispered low and shadows moved like water, there stood a single bamboo stalk, taller than the rest, slender and still. The monks called it the Watcher, for every night it leaned just slightly toward the sky, as if listening to something only it could hear. No matter the season, rain, frost, or wind, it remained unmoving, always facing the same direction. While the other bamboos swayed and shifted, this one stayed with its gaze fixed upward toward the moon. A young novice named Malu became curious. Each night after chanting, he would visit the grove and sit beneath the Watcher. He noticed how the moonlight fell on its smooth green body, how it never cracked, never bent, yet never tried to outshine anything else. He began to wonder, why does it look at the moon, night after night, without rest? One evening, Malu asked the elder monk, "Why does that bamboo seem to watch the moon?" The elder smiled. "Because it has learned the art of stillness, and stillness teaches us how to truly see." Malu frowned. "But it doesn't do anything." "Exactly," the elder said. "And in not doing, it receives everything. The moon needs no praise. The bamboo asks for no reward. But between them, there is a peace we can feel just by being near." So Malu began to sit longer under the Watcher. On some nights, when the moon was full, he noticed how his thoughts would quiet, how even sorrow seemed to soften. The bamboo said nothing, but its silence said more than any words. One night, when Malu felt troubled by doubt and restlessness, he asked aloud, "How do I stay calm when the world keeps changing?" A breeze passed through the grove, rustling the leaves gently. The bamboo made no sound. It only stood, rooted, silent, looking up at the moon. And in that moment, Malu understood. The bamboo did not resist the wind. It simply accepted it, while never turning away from what it loved. Moral of the story: Stillness is not emptiness, it is devotion without noise. Like the bamboo that watches the moon, peace comes when we stop chasing and start witnessing. The world may move around us, but we do not have to move with it. We only have to stay present and look up. The teardrop that turned to crystal. In a village, nestled between high cliffs and flowering fields, there was a legend passed quietly from elder to child, that once a single teardrop fell to the ground and became a crystal, clear, bright, and impossible to break. Many dismissed it as a story to comfort children, but in the old temple by the river, the crystal sat on the altar, small as a pebble, glowing softly under the oil lamp's flicker. No one knew exactly how it came to be until a wandering bhikkhuni named Anisa arrived one spring. She carried no possessions, only a gentle gaze and a silence that seemed deeper than speech. She stayed in the temple to sweep, cook, and meditate. The villagers welcomed her, sensing her peace, but no one dared ask about her past. Only the head monk, an old man with kind eyes, knew who she had once been. Years ago, Anisa had lost her entire family in a fire. The grief nearly pulled her from the world. For weeks, she did not speak. For months, she could not pray. But one night, alone in the ashes of her former home, she knelt in the dust and wept, not with rage, not with resistance, but with surrender. "I have nothing left," she whispered, "but I am still here." As the moonlight touched her cheek, one tear fell to the earth. She didn't notice what happened then, but in that moment of complete release, when her heart opened without demand, without blame, the earth received her pain, and something in the ground shimmered. She became a monastic not to escape sorrow, but to understand it. And with each passing year, her heart softened rather than closed. Her grief didn't vanish, it became compassion. When the villagers asked the head monk about the crystal, he only said, "It's not a miracle of stone. It's a reminder that what is born from true acceptance never breaks." Anisa would sometimes sit near the crystal, eyes closed, not praying, not asking, just breathing, remembering. Moral of the story: sorrow doesn't destroy us when we allow it to move through us. A tear shed in surrender, not despair, can become something unbreakable. True healing begins when we stop holding pain like a wound and begin to hold it like a seed. The Novice and the Broken Gate. At the edge of a small monastery, nestled between fields of wildflowers and tall pines, stood an old wooden gate, worn from years of sun, wind, and time. Its hinges creaked, and one side leaned slightly inward, as if bowing under the weight of its own years. It didn't close properly, and sometimes the wind would blow it open in the middle of the night. Many visitors asked why it had not been repaired, but the abbot always said, "Let it be, it still serves." One day, a new novice named Tepa arrived, eager to prove his worth. He scrubbed floors until they shone, polished bowls until they reflected the sky, and learned every chant by heart. But the broken gate bothered him. It felt out of place in a place so dedicated to mindfulness and care. Without asking, Tepa took it upon himself to fix it. He worked for hours in the sun, pulling nails, adjusting the frame, sanding and hammering. When he was finished, the gate stood straight and closed tightly, the creak replaced with silence. That evening, the abbot walked past and paused. He looked at the now perfect gate and smiled, not with praise, but with gentle sadness. "You fixed it," he said softly. Tepa beamed. "Yes, Bhante. It was old and broken. It needed to be made right." The abbot nodded slowly. "Did it let you in when you first arrived?" "Yes," Tepa replied. "Did it let the wind through, so the garden never grew too still?" Tepa hesitated. "Yes." The abbot placed a hand on the wood. "Sometimes what is slightly broken teaches us more than what is flawless." The gate reminded us that things can still serve even when they are imperfect. It reminded us to enter gently and not to seek control. Now it is silent, perfect, and perhaps a little less alive. Tepa stood in silence as the wind passed by. The gate did not move. That night, he sat by the gate for hours, watching how it no longer swayed with the breeze. It was strong, but no longer soft. The next morning, he loosened one hinge. Moral of the story: perfection is not always the highest form of beauty. Sometimes, a small flaw invites tenderness, patience, and care. What is imperfect may still open the way and teach us how to walk through with humility. The bell without a sound. High atop a fog-wrapped mountain stood an old monastery carved into the stone. It had no grand gates, no golden statues, no crowds of visitors. But it was known for one thing: a large, perfectly shaped bronze bell that had never been rung. It hung in the center of the meditation hall, suspended by thick rope, its surface clean but untouched by time. Monks came and went in silence, walking past it with reverence. Novices whispered stories about it. Some said the bell was sacred, that its sound could only be heard by the awakened. Others claimed it had no sound at all. A young novice named Tenzin arrived at the monastery one winter, full of questions and the restless energy of someone trying very hard to be still. He meditated, he studied, he swept every corner of the grounds. Yet, no matter how long he sat or how many scriptures he read, his mind refused to quiet. One night, unable to sleep, Tenzin crept into the hall and stood before the bell. Moonlight touched its bronze surface. He stared at it, wondering, what would it sound like? Would it echo through the mountains? Would it calm the heart? Unable to resist, he reached out and gently struck it with his knuckle. Nothing. No chime, not even a whisper. The next morning, he confessed to the head monk, expecting scolding or shame, but the old monk only smiled. "Did you hear anything?" he asked. "No," Tenzin replied, eyes downcast. "It's just a bell without a sound." The monk placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you heard it perfectly." Tenzin looked up, confused. The monk continued, "This bell was made not to call the world, but to quiet the one ringing it. You expected it to give you something, but it only gives silence. And silence, when accepted instead of feared, becomes the loudest truth." From that day on, Tenzin stopped searching for signs and began listening, not with his ears, but with stillness. The bell never rang, but somehow he began to hear everything more clearly. The wind in the trees, the rhythm of his breath, the quiet aching of others. And within it all, a peace that needed no sound. Moral of the story: not all truths are spoken. Some bells ring only in silence. When we stop expecting the world to answer us with noise, we begin to hear the wisdom that has always been waiting inside the quiet. The pillow of mindfulness. In a hillside monastery, where the bells chimed softly at dawn and clouds lingered like thoughts across the mountains, there lived a young novice named Nemi. Like many new to the path, Nemi was sincere but restless. During meditation, his knees ached. During chanting, his voice wavered. At night, when others slept soundly, Nemi tossed and turned beneath his thin blanket, his mind filled with what-ifs and should-haves, futures he feared and pasts he couldn't change. One evening, noticing the dark circles beneath his eyes, the elder monk handed Nemi a small, handmade pillow. It was nothing special, stuffed with cotton, stitched unevenly, but soft and warm in the palm. "Place this beneath your head tonight," the elder said. "But before you do, speak one word into it, and one word only." Nemi looked confused. "What word should I say?" The monk smiled. "That is for you to discover." That night, Nemi lay down with the pillow cradled beneath his neck. He closed his eyes, but his thoughts began again, the same whirl of doubts and distractions. Then he remembered. "Speak one word." He whispered, "Peace." Then silence. The next night he said, "Release." Then silence. Each night he gave the pillow a word: trust, breathe, let go, enough. The words were not commands, but offerings, simple seeds dropped into the space between waking and sleep. Over time, something began to shift. The thoughts still came, but they didn't grip so tightly. The tossing became turning. Then turning became stillness. His breath slowed, his chest softened. And as he fell asleep, it was not because he had escaped his thoughts, but because he had gently placed them down, one word at a time. Other novices noticed the change. "You seem rested," they said, "more calm." Nemi smiled and showed them the small, worn pillow. "It doesn't quiet your mind," he said. "It listens to it. And once it's been heard, the mind quiets on its own." Years later, when Nemi became a teacher, he gave every new novice a simple pillow, not to fix their sleep, but to begin a nightly ritual of presence. Moral of the story: mindfulness does not begin in the temple or the forest. It begins with how we rest. When we meet each night with a gentle word and an open heart, even our sleep becomes part of the path. Peace often arrives, not with silence, but with the softness of being heard. The ant that crossed the altar. In a small forest monastery, hidden between rows of teak trees and tangled vines, there stood a meditation hall built from wood and stone. Inside it, the altar was kept simple: no gold, no jewels, only a statue of the Buddha, a small oil lamp, and a bowl of water. The monks cleaned it daily with care, bowing low, speaking softly, honoring the space as sacred. One morning, during chanting, a small black ant crawled onto the altar. It moved slowly, with delicate legs, across the edge of the water bowl and toward the base of the Buddha statue. The monks noticed, but said nothing. They continued their chants, watching from the corners of their eyes as the tiny ant made its way across a surface that no one but the most senior monk had ever touched. After the session, one of the young novices approached the abbot. "Should we have removed the ant?" he asked. "That's a sacred space." The old abbot smiled, his eyes soft with memory. "That altar is only sacred because of what it represents, not because of what it forbids." The novice tilted his head. But it's just an ant. The abbot placed his hands together. Yes, an ant. And yet, in that moment, it moved with more mindfulness than many of us do. It did not hurry. It did not fear. It crossed the altar not with intention to defile, but simply to live. He paused, then added, "We bow to statues, but life bows back through every being that moves gently, without greed or hate. Even an ant, when crossing with care, honors the sacred." The next morning, the monks noticed that the ant had returned. Again, it moved across the altar, this time slower, as if aware of the space it entered. None of the monks stopped it. In fact, they lowered their gaze, as if letting it pass undisturbed was part of their practice. Over time, the story spread. Visitors came not to see the altar, but to witness the ant. Some saw it, some didn't. But the feeling remained that something tiny had taught them all to move through the world with more softness. Moral of the story: reverence is not about size or status. Even the smallest life, moving with care, can honor the sacred. True mindfulness isn't reserved for altars. It is the way we step, the way we see, and the way we allow all beings to simply be. The dustless mirror. In a secluded temple nestled between mountains and drifting clouds, there was said to be a mirror that had never gathered dust. It hung in the meditation hall, plain and unadorned, with no gold, no carving, just a smooth surface framed in aged wood. Visitors often passed it by without notice. It gave no reflection unless one stood very close, and even then it seemed to show not just the face, but something quieter beneath it. Many monks believed the story was just legend. "There's no such thing as a mirror that stays clean," they would say. "Even stone weathers, even breath leaves a mark." But one day, a new monk named Jory arrived. He was young, eager, and full of questions. He had left a life of noise and confusion behind, hoping to find clarity on the path. He heard about the mirror on his first day and became quietly obsessed. Every morning, after chores and chanting, Jory would go to the hall and gaze into it. At first, he saw only his tired eyes, his messy robes, the shadow of doubt. "This mirror is no different than any other," he thought. But he kept returning, day after day. One evening, after a difficult meditation where his thoughts refused to settle, Jory stumbled into the hall feeling defeated. He sat before the mirror, not to analyze, not to test it, but simply because he had nowhere else to go. He looked into the glass, exhausted and bare. And for the first time, he didn't see himself. He saw stillness. Not a blank surface, not emptiness, but stillness. It wasn't that the mirror had no dust, it was that it did not cling to the dust. Whatever landed, passed. Whatever came, went. He understood then, the mirror was just a mirror. But what made it dustless was not magic. It was its nature, to reflect without attachment. He bowed to it, not for what it showed, but for what it revealed in him. Moral of the story: a peaceful mind is like a dustless mirror, not because nothing touches it, but because nothing stays. Thoughts, emotions, and fears may come, but they do not have to leave a mark. When we stop clinging, we begin to see clearly, not just the world, but our true selves. The cave where silence spoke. Deep in the folds of a forest, untouched by time, hidden behind curtains of moss and climbing vines, There was a cave known only by those who sought more than answers, those who sought to listen. It was not marked on any path nor mentioned in temple chants, but the elders knew it by name, the cave where silence spoke. Once every few years, a monk or seeker would find their way there, usually not on purpose. And once inside, they would sit in the center, where no wind entered, where even the breath felt still. The cave was small, cold, and utterly quiet, but it held a presence, not empty, not dark, just vast. A young monk named Kiran, filled with questions and a heart that could not settle, had heard whispers of the cave. Though warned that it offered no guidance, no visions, no voices, he set out alone. His mind was heavy with conflict, questions of purpose, of identity, of the meaning of the path he had chosen. He had read every sutra, memorized every chant. Still, peace evaded him like mist in morning light. When he entered the cave, it was nothing like he imagined. There were no markings, no carvings, no glow. Just stone and silence. He sat cross-legged, closed his eyes, and waited for wisdom to come. Hours passed, then a day, then two. No thoughts arrived to save him, no divine clarity, only the sound of his own breath, the ache in his legs, the rising panic of stillness, too deep to explain. He wanted to scream, but there was no one to hear it. And then, without warning, the panic softened. His breath slowed. The pressure of needing to understand fell away like old leaves. There was no moment of revelation, just space. And in that space, a soft truth emerged, not as words, but as feeling. You are already what you are looking for. Tears came, quiet ones, not from pain, but from something loosening at last. Kiran bowed, not to a statue, not to a teacher, but to the silence itself. He left the cave the next morning, carrying nothing but breath and a stillness that stayed. Moral of the story: silence does not give answers. It gives space, and in that space, truth does not shout. It arrives. When we stop filling every silence with thought, we finally hear the voice that has waited within us all along. The fisherman who dreamed of sutras. In a quiet seaside village where waves whispered more than they roared, there lived a fisherman named Sanu. He was kind, humble, and rose each morning before the sun, casting his net with steady hands and a simple heart. He had never learned to read, never set foot in a temple, and barely knew the chants the monks recited on festival days. "The sea is my teacher," he would say. "The tide gives, the tide takes. I listen." Yet, at night, something strange began to happen. Sanu started to dream, not of fish or storms or sails, but of ancient words he had never heard before. Gentle voices filled his sleep, reciting sutras in languages he could not name, yet somehow understood. He would wake up before dawn with tears in his eyes, not from fear, but from something he couldn't explain. Peace, maybe, or a feeling of being held. At first, he told no one. Who would believe him? But the dreams continued. Night after night, verses floated into his heart like soft waves. He began to notice changes in himself. He grew more patient with the tangled nets. He no longer cursed when the sea gave him little. He smiled more, even when alone. People in the village began to sense it too. One day, while mending a net near the shore, Sanu saw an elderly monk walking along the water's edge. The monk paused and said, "You carry a calmness I don't often see outside the monastery." Sanu bowed awkwardly. "I don't know sutras. I've never studied, but lately I dream of them." The monk sat beside him, curious. "And what do they say?" Sanu closed his eyes, then whispered, "They say nothing stays. They say kindness is the only boat that floats forever. They say, I am not the waves, I am the ocean beneath them." The monk smiled, his gaze soft. "You have learned what cannot be taught in books. The Dharma flows wherever the heart is open. Even dreams can be temples." That evening, Sanu cast his net into the sea with tears on his cheeks, whispering thanks, not for fish, but for the unseen teachings that had found him in the quiet space between the tides. Moral of the story: wisdom does not always arrive through study. Sometimes when the heart is ready, the teachings come, through dreams, through silence, through the rhythm of ordinary life. The Dharma speaks in many voices. We only need to listen. The raindrop that meditated. High in the mountains where clouds linger like thoughts not yet spoken, a storm was forming. From its grey belly, a single raindrop was born, small, weightless, trembling on the edge of release. It fell from the sky, not with fear, but with wonder, tumbling through the air, past peaks and leaves and silence. As it fell, the raindrop began to ask, "Where will I land? Will I matter? Am I just one drop among so many?" The questions tumbled faster than the wind. What if I land on stone and vanish? What if no one sees me? What if I disappear before I even become something? Then, sudden stillness. The raindrop landed softly on the leaf of a Bodhi tree that grew beside a forest monastery. It did not shatter. It did not vanish. It rested, round and whole, perfectly still. The leaf held it like a palm holding breath, and for the first time, the raindrop did not fall or ask. It simply was. A young monk sat beneath that same tree, eyes closed, unaware of the raindrop above him. But in the stillness they both shared, something passed between them, an unspoken knowing. No rushing, no seeking, just presence. The raindrop did not cling to the leaf. It shimmered quietly, reflecting the sky, the branch, the monk's robe. It saw everything, but held nothing. It breathed without lungs. It waited without wanting. It listened. Moments passed. Then the wind came, soft, gentle, and carried the raindrop down the curve of the leaf onto the soil below, where it was absorbed into the earth without sound or struggle. The monk opened his eyes. He hadn't seen the drop, but something inside him had stilled, as if the rain had whispered a lesson into his bones. He bowed to the tree and returned to the monastery with a deeper breath than he had known before. Moral of the story: we don't have to be loud to be meaningful. Like a single raindrop, the most powerful presence is quiet, simple, and complete in its moment. When we stop rushing to become something else, we realize we already are enough, just as we are, resting gently on the leaf of now. The spider that wove mandalas. In a monastery nestled in the curve of a misty mountain range, there lived a small spider that made its home beneath the eaves of the meditation hall. She was not large nor fearsome, just a quiet presence, unnoticed by most. While monks sat in stillness, chanting sutras or watching their breath, she wove. Every morning, the monks would find a new web glistening between the beams, intricate, circular, and impossibly delicate. The spider worked in the silence of night, her threads catching the moonlight like silver brushstrokes. Some monks found the webs distracting and brushed them away. Others, moved by their quiet beauty, began to leave them undisturbed. One day, a visiting teacher noticed a perfect web stretched across the window of the library. He called the novices and said, "Look closely. Do you see the Dharma here?" They looked puzzled. "It's just a spider's web, Bhante." The teacher smiled. "Yes. And yet, each thread holds everything we speak of: interconnection, impermanence, and form born from stillness." He explained, "The spider does not force her design. She follows instinct, but moves with the wind. Each thread depends on another. If one strand breaks, the pattern changes, but she doesn't mourn the loss. She simply begins again, patient, focused, present." That night, a storm came. Rain lashed the roof, and wind howled through the trees. By morning, all the webs were gone. The halls dripped with water, and the spider was nowhere to be seen. A novice felt sadness rise. Her work was destroyed. But the next evening, under the dim light of an oil lamp, the spider returned. One thread, then two, then the pattern again, emerging silently, as if nothing had been lost. She didn't rebuild it exactly the same. She didn't need to. She simply wove what was needed in the moment that was offered. The monks began to call her Arya, the noble one. They no longer swept away her work. They bowed to it. Moral of the story: creation does not need recognition. When we build from presence, each act becomes a meditation. Life may break what we make, but peace is found in the quiet willingness to begin again. Like the spider, we can weave beauty from stillness without clinging to what was. The rock that floated in Samadhi. Near a slow-moving river, far from cities and footsteps, there was a temple carved into the cliffs. Behind it, nestled between roots and stone, was a small cave used by monks for deep meditation. The cave was known for its silence, so complete that even the sound of a heartbeat seemed like thunder within it. There, a monk named Anuj had taken a vow of solitude. For years, he sat in meditation day and night, moving only to gather rainwater and pick fallen fruit. He spoke to no one. He neither sought visions nor chased enlightenment. He only breathed, each inhale like a bow, each exhale like a release. One day, during the rainy season, the river flooded. Water crept up the stone path, covering the roots and grass, reaching the base of the cave. Villagers downstream watched in alarm. If the waters rose much further, the cave would flood completely. And then something impossible happened. A large, flat rock, embedded in the riverbed just outside the cave, began to rise. At first, it was slow, unnoticed. But within an hour, the rock, heavy as a mountain child, floated clear of the water and hovered just above the surface. It didn't drift. It didn't spin. It simply rested there, suspended in stillness. The villagers whispered of magic, of blessings, of miracles, But inside the cave, Anuj remained in deep samadhi, unmoving, eyes closed, unaware of the stir outside. He was not trying to control the river, or stop the flood, or raise stones. He was only resting in complete awareness. In that awareness, there was no fear, no resistance, only unity. The rock floated for 3 days. On the 4th morning, the water receded, and the rock gently returned to its place on the riverbed without a splash. Anuj opened his eyes, stretched his legs, and walked out to gather fruit as usual, unaware of the awe he had inspired. When the villagers asked the elder monk how such a thing was possible, he replied, "It was not the rock that rose. It was the mind that became light enough to lift the world around it." Moral of the story: true stillness does not control nature, it joins it. When the mind rests in deep peace, even the heaviest burdens can lift. In samadhi, we do not float by escaping the world, but by becoming so present that the world no longer weighs us down. The goat who circled the Bodhi tree. In the sacred grove of Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha once sat in deep stillness and awakened beneath the Bodhi tree, pilgrims came from every corner of the world. They brought flowers, incense, golden robes, and whispered prayers as they circled the tree in reverence. Monks bowed. Children lit candles. The atmosphere shimmered with quiet devotion. But among the pilgrims, there was one visitor no one expected: a small, scruffy goat. No one knew where he came from. His fur was uneven, his horns chipped, and one of his legs had a limp. Yet every morning, as the sun rose, the goat would slowly walk around the Bodhi tree 3 times, always in the same direction. He didn't rush. He didn't bleat. He simply walked, his hooves making soft sounds on the stone path. At first, the monks tried to shoo him away. "This is no place for animals," some whispered. "He'll disturb the offerings." But no one ever saw him eat the flowers or push through the crowds. He never begged. He just walked his slow circle, then rested under the shade of the tree. One day, a novice named Lila followed the goat quietly and sat beside him. She had been struggling in her practice, her thoughts noisy, her emotions tangled. But as she watched the goat limp around the tree, something in her heart began to soften. The goat didn't seek attention. He didn't seem to be trying to gain merit. And yet, there was devotion in every step. Not the devotion of ritual, but of rhythm, of presence. That evening, Lila asked the abbot, "Bhante, can an animal have faith?" The abbot smiled gently. "Faith is not only a matter of words, it is the steady return to what matters. That goat may not know the Dharma in the way we do, but he knows how to walk with it, quietly, without complaint, without pride. That, too, is practice." The next morning, the monks no longer pushed the goat away. Some even began walking with him, slowly, in silence, learning to bow not just with the body, but with the heart. The goat never stayed the night, but each dawn he returned. Moral of the story: true devotion is not measured by knowledge or form. It is shown in how we return, again and again, with sincerity. Even the humblest being can walk the path, step by step, just by showing up with presence and peace. The dog that protected the precepts. In a bustling village nestled beside the forest where carts rattled along dusty roads and temple bells marked the hours, there lived a stray dog named Balu. He had no owner, no collar, and no name for many years. His fur was patchy, his ears torn from old fights, and his eyes sharp with the wisdom of survival. People shooed him away from shops, threw stones when he got too close, and whispered, "That dog is trouble." But the monks at the edge of the village saw something else. Every morning before alms round, Balu would arrive at the temple gates. He never barked, never begged. He would sit quietly outside the meditation hall, ears alert, eyes soft. He listened to chants as if they were familiar melodies. When the monks walked out barefoot with their bowls, he followed at a respectful distance, never too close, never ahead, never in the way. One day, a visiting monk asked the abbot, "Why do you allow this dog to stay? Isn't he a distraction?" The abbot smiled. "Watch him," he said. That afternoon, a traveler came to the temple, unaware of its customs. As he entered the sacred grounds, he lit a cigarette and reached for a nearby fruit offering, intending to eat it. Before anyone could speak, Balu stood and placed himself between the man and the altar, not growling, not aggressive, just there, calm, unmoving, eyes fixed. The traveler paused, then stepped back in confusion. A monk gently approached and explained the temple's precepts. No intoxicants, no stealing, no disrespect toward offerings. The man nodded, embarrassed, and left quietly. Balu returned to his spot and lay down, eyes closing, as if nothing had happened. The monks began to call him Dhamma, meaning the path. He never needed to be trained. He simply lived the way. No harm, no greed, no intrusion. If two dogs fought near the temple gate, Dhamma would step between them and sit. His presence alone was enough to stop them. He never took food until it was offered. He never crossed the line into the inner sanctuary. He guarded not with teeth, but with awareness. When he passed many years later, the monks built a small stone by the temple wall that simply read, "He protected what many forget." Moral of the story: guarding the path does not require words or status, only presence and respect. When we live with quiet integrity, even the world's noise begins to bow. True protection comes not through force, but through stillness that refuses to harm. The whisper that entered Nibbana. In a remote hermitage, high in the mist-wrapped hills, lived an elder monk named Sakananda. He was known not for grand teachings or miracles, but for the way he spoke, as if every word were a leaf falling gently from a tree. His voice was soft, never raised, often no more than a whisper. Many monks questioned how such quiet speech could carry the weight of the Dhamma. One day, a restless monk named Veera arrived at the hermitage. He had studied many texts, debated loudly in halls, and believed wisdom must be spoken with strength. When he met Sakananda, he was confused by the silence. "How can anyone learn from you if they can barely hear you?" he asked. The elder monk only smiled and said, barely audible, "If you truly listen, even a whisper can reveal the end of suffering." Veera scoffed. "But how can a whisper enter the mind?" Sakananda turned to him and said gently, "A whisper doesn't enter the mind. It enters the stillness behind it." Veera said nothing, but the words followed him. That night, as the wind passed through the tall trees and the forest exhaled its cool breath, he lay awake, replaying those soft syllables. He began to notice how loud his own thoughts were, how full of proving, defending, seeking. There was no room to hear anything but himself. The next day, Vera asked to sit with the elder during meditation. No teachings were given, no words spoken, only breath, birds, leaves, heartbeats. Days passed. The silence became deeper, not empty, but full of presence. One evening, as they sat facing the horizon where the sun melted into cloud, Sakananda leaned in and whispered one line from the suttas. "There is the unborn, the unmade, the unconditioned." That was all, but in that exact moment, the noise in Vera's mind fell away like a crumbling wall. No grand insight, no fire, just stillness, open, wide, without end. A silence he didn't need to describe. The next morning, Sakananda had passed away, his body calm, his face smiling. The monks said he had entered Nibbana not with chanting or ceremony, but with a whisper. Moral of the story: truth does not need to shout. When the mind becomes quiet enough, even a whisper can awaken it. Liberation comes not through force, but through deep stillness, where the smallest sound reveals the vastest freedom. The sound of a smile. In a village surrounded by rice paddies and blue hills, where laughter often mixed with birdsong, there lived a girl named Lani, who had never spoken a word. From the moment she was born, she was silent. Not because she lacked a voice, but because her voice never came. Doctors could not explain it. Her parents had tried everything, but no words ever left her lips. At first, people pitied her. Then they ignored her. Over time, they began to talk around her as if she wasn't there. But Lani watched, she listened, and most of all, she smiled. Not the kind of smile that hides sorrow, nor the kind that begs for attention. Hers was the kind of smile that softened rooms, that quieted anger, that made even bitter hearts pause. She visited the temple every morning. While others chanted, she would sweep the steps, wash the bowls, or pick fallen flowers from the altar. She never bowed with grand gestures. She never led a chant, but every monk knew her by her silence and by the warmth she carried like a lantern. One day, a traveling monk came through the village. He had walked from far away, seeking peace after a lifetime of teaching. His mind was heavy with doubts. Had his words helped anyone? Had all his talks changed anything at all? The more he had taught, the more tired he had become. As he sat beneath the temple's Bodhi tree, Lani walked by with her basket of lotus petals. She paused, noticed the worry in his face, and offered him a small flower. No words, no bow, just a soft smile. The monk looked at her, surprised. No one had spoken to him without asking for advice in years. And here was someone offering nothing except kindness that needed no explanation. In that moment, something inside him cracked open. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Later, he told the abbot, "Today, I heard something I've never heard before." "What was it?" the abbot asked. "The sound of a smile." Moral of the story: not all healing comes through words. Sometimes a single quiet gesture carries more truth than 1,000 teachings. A smile given without reason, without demand, becomes a sound the heart never forgets, because it speaks directly to what is already whole. The flower that bloomed in a skull. Deep in a forgotten part of the forest, Far from temples and towns, there stood an old charnel ground, dry, overgrown, and scattered with remains of those who had long since passed. Monks rarely came here. Only the bravest meditated in such a place, where death whispered from every stone and silence clung to the air like fog. One day, a wandering monk named Anoma arrived. He was thin, with robes patched by years of travel and eyes that carried a quiet tiredness. He had studied sutras, practiced austerities, sought answers in countless places, but something within him still ached with fear, not fear of pain, but of death, of the unknown, of the end. He had heard the charnel ground was cursed, that strange visions came to those who meditated there. But still he sat, alone, facing the skull of some forgotten being, half buried in earth, its hollow sockets staring back. Each night the wind cried through the trees. Insects crawled over his robe. The air smelled of decay and time. Thoughts rose. Will this be me? Will my bones lie here someday, nameless, scattered? One morning, after many days of silence, he opened his eyes and noticed something strange. A single flower had bloomed. It grew from within the skull, tiny, white, and trembling in the breeze, but unmistakably alive. Its petals rested gently on the curved bone, as if bowing to what had once been. Anoma stared at it for hours, not out of fear, but wonder. The skull had once been a person, full of desire, breath, thought. Now it was empty, and yet, from that emptiness, something beautiful had grown. He felt something shift in his chest. The fear that had clung to him for years, tight, cold, invisible, began to loosen. Death was not an end. It was change, return, space. Even from the remnants of what had passed, new life could appear. He bowed deeply to the skull, then to the flower. He understood now. Death was not his enemy. It was his teacher. Moral of the story: even from the bones of what was lost, beauty can rise. When we stop fearing endings, we begin to see their quiet offerings. In emptiness, there is space for new life. In death, the ground for awakening. The Sleeping Mountain. There was once a mountain so vast and ancient that no one could remember when it first rose from the earth. The villagers who lived in its shadow called it Samatha, meaning stillness, for it never rumbled, never erupted, and never seemed to change. Birds nested in its trees, monks built temples along its ridges, and clouds circled its peak like garlands made of breath. To many, it was just a mountain, but to the monks who meditated on its slopes, it was something more. A young novice named Danu had just joined the temple nestled at the mountain's base. He was eager and bright, but restless. His mind raced during meditation. His knees hurt. His thoughts came like storms. "Why can't I be still like the elders?" he asked. "Why does my mind keep wandering?" One dawn, the abbot invited Danu on a silent walk. They climbed the stone path that twisted through bamboo and moss, higher and higher, until the trees thinned and the air grew sharp. They sat together on a flat rock, overlooking the vast valley below. The mountain loomed behind them, unmoving. The abbot finally spoke, his voice like a breeze. "What is this mountain doing?" Danu blinked. "Nothing. It's just there, sleeping." The abbot nodded. "And in its sleep, does it stop being a mountain?" No. Does it hurry to grow? Does it resist the wind or fight the rain? Danu shook his head. Yet rivers flow from it. Life shelters in it. Even in sleep it gives. Danu turned to look at the mountain. Truly look. It didn't speak, but it held the world. It didn't act, but it allowed everything. It didn't chase stillness. It was stillness. And suddenly he understood. Meditation wasn't about forcing the mind into silence. It was about allowing stillness to arise, like a mountain that doesn't move, even when clouds pass or storms weep on its skin. That evening, Danu sat again, but this time not to chase peace. He simply sat like the mountain behind him, present, quiet, and vast. Moral of the story: peace does not come from effort alone. Like a sleeping mountain, true stillness arises when we stop struggling and begin to rest within ourselves. We do not need to become calm. We only need to remember that calm is already there, waiting beneath the noise. The footprint that faced backward. In the lowlands where mist curled along riverbanks and farmers woke with the sun, there was a narrow path used by villagers and wandering monks alike. One morning, after a night of heavy rain, a group of novices walking that trail noticed something strange. There in the mud, just ahead of them, was a single footprint, clear and deep, but it faced the wrong direction. The heel pointed forward, the toes faced back. They paused, puzzled. Whoever left this was walking backward, one whispered. It must be a mistake, another said. Maybe they turned around. But the footprint was alone, no others before it, no others after. When they returned to the monastery, the novices spoke of the odd print to the elder monk, expecting him to dismiss it as nonsense. Instead, he closed his eyes and smiled gently. "Ah," he said, "it may have been the one who turned around." They blinked. "Who?" "A wandering arahant once traveled through this region," he explained. She had gone far in her search for awakening. Mountains, deserts, temples, texts. But at some point, she realized that everything she was seeking was already behind her, in the simplicity she had left behind. So she stopped, turned around, and began walking home, step by step, not toward more knowledge, but toward understanding. The novices were silent. She placed one foot in the mud, the elder continued, facing backward, not by accident, but by intention, to remind herself the path to truth is not always ahead. Sometimes it is in returning. Years passed, and the rains came and went. The footprint faded, but the story remained. Monks would occasionally leave a single backward step outside their doors during retreat, not for others to follow, but as a gentle vow to stop running, to come back to the present, to remember. The footprint never led anywhere, and yet it led home. Moral of the story: not all progress means moving forward. Sometimes the most profound journey is the one that returns us to what we left behind. In turning back, not in regret, but in awareness, we often find what we were seeking all along, the stillness beneath the steps, the ghost that found peace in chanting. In a village wrapped in mist and old stories, people told tales of a ghost that wandered near the ancient temple at the edge of the woods. It had no name, no form that stayed the same, only a presence that chilled the air and rattled the lamps when night grew quiet. Some said It was the spirit of a lost mother searching for her child. Others believed it was a monk who died with regrets. The villagers feared the ghost. They avoided the temple after sunset and left offerings at the gate, hoping to be spared. But nothing changed. Each night, the wind still howled through the trees, and the shadows seemed to shiver with sadness. One day, a gentle monk named Bhante Risu arrived at the temple. He was calm, with a soft smile and a robe the color of worn earth. He listened to the villagers' warnings, bowed in thanks, and said nothing in return. That night, when the sky turned deep blue and the winds began to stir, Bhante Risu walked alone into the main hall. He lit a single oil lamp. He placed his hands together, and he began to chant. The verses were not loud. They flowed like water, slow and steady, the ancient syllables carrying warmth into the cold space. As he chanted, the wind outside softened. The shadows grew still, and then, just above the flicker of the flame, there was a presence. No scream, no moan, just a subtle change in the air, like someone holding their breath after centuries of weeping. Bhante Risu did not flinch. He continued to chant, eyes half closed, voice steady. The ghost listened. It had wandered for so long, pulled by pain, chained by memory. But no one had ever spoken to it like this, not with fear, not with judgment, but with peace. The sound entered what was left of its heart, reaching where nothing else had. And slowly, its form began to change, growing lighter, softer, like steam lifting from warm stone. With each verse, its sorrow uncoiled. With each breath, it let go. When the final chant ended, there was no scream, no burst of light, just silence, stillness, peace. The ghost never returned. But the villagers noticed that the temple felt warmer after that, lighter. And during evening chants, some swore they felt something beside them, not cold, but calm. Moral of the story: even restless spirits can be soothed, not by force, but by compassion. Peace does not chase away darkness, it invites it to rest. In the rhythm of kind chanting, even the most haunted hearts can remember how to let go. The scroll that vanished in fire. In a monastery perched on a high ridge where the wind carried the scent of pine and old stone, there was once a scroll unlike any other. Handwritten by generations of monks, it held a rare teaching, a single continuous commentary said to be so clear, so compassionate, that those who read it often wept, not from sadness, but from recognition. The scroll was unadorned, its cover plain. It was kept not in a golden case or behind locked doors, but in a small wooden box on the altar, wrapped in cloth. Every full moon, the monks would open it in silence and take turns reading aloud. They treated it like breath, sacred, essential, unseen by most of the world. One cold night, lightning struck the outer building. Flames rushed through the monastery before anyone could stop them. Monks formed lines of water buckets. Chants mixed with coughing. The sacred hall was swallowed in red and gold, and by morning the scroll was gone. Only ashes remained. Many monks grieved. Some fell into silence for days. One wept openly and said, "The teaching is lost." But the abbot, calm though his robe was singed, called the community together. In the garden where the smoke still hung low, he said gently, "Nothing is lost when it has been lived." He pointed to the monks seated before him. "The scroll is not in ashes, it is in you. Each word you read, each silence you honored, each kindness you gave afterward, that was the teaching. Fire cannot burn what has been transformed into the heart." The monks slowly began to understand. They remembered verses not with their minds, but with their choices. One helped an old monk walk again without being asked. Another brought food to a farmer who had lost his crop. Without speaking of it, they began to live what they had once read. Years later, travelers came seeking the legendary scroll. "We heard it burned," they said. "Do you have a copy?" A monk smiled and replied, "No copy remains, but if you stay here a while, you might still hear it. In the way we sweep the floor, in the way we serve tea, in the way we listen." Moral of the story: teachings written on paper may vanish, but those written in the heart remain forever. True wisdom is not kept in scrolls, but in how we live. What we absorb through presence can never be destroyed, not even by fire. The basket of invisible food. In a village struck by drought, where the riverbeds cracked and the soil turned to dust, hunger became a quiet shadow in every home. The temple, once vibrant with chants and morning offerings, grew still. The monks, bound by the Vinaya, continued their daily alms rounds, but each day they returned with nearly empty bowls and softer voices. Among them was a young monk named Jyoti, whose eyes still carried the brightness of new vows. Though he understood the teachings, he struggled to accept the suffering he now saw. Each morning, he walked barefoot from hut to hut, met with kind eyes that had nothing to give. One day, as he approached the poorest part of the village, he saw an old woman sitting outside a collapsed hut. She was thin, her clothes torn, and her hands trembled. Still, when she saw Jyoti, she bowed. "I have nothing," she whispered, "not even a grain of rice." Jyoti bowed in return. "Then may I offer you something?" he asked gently. She smiled weakly and nodded. From his shoulder, he removed a small woven basket, something he carried not for food, but for medicines and cloths. With great care, he placed the empty basket between them and closed his eyes. He whispered a verse, not to beggars or gods, but to the spirit of giving itself. "I place in this basket the taste of kindness, the scent of selflessness, the warmth of presence. Let it feed what the belly cannot, and heal what the eyes do not see." The woman closed her eyes too. In that moment, the hunger remained, but it softened. Her breath steadied. Her hands stopped shaking. She felt, for the first time in many days, not alone. Word of the invisible food spread. Soon, other villagers, those with nothing, began placing imaginary fruits, rice and sweets into the monks' bowls each morning, and the monks, in return, offered chants, stories, and silent company. The hunger did not disappear, but despair began to lift, like mist after a long night. No one ever saw the basket filled, yet no one ever left it empty. Moral of the story: not all nourishment comes from what we hold. Sometimes the purest gift is intention, given with open hands and open heart. When compassion is offered sincerely, even the invisible can feed the soul. The sister who was a raindrop. In a quiet nunnery perched beside a waterfall, where mist touched the robes of those who walked slowly and barefoot, there lived a young Samaneri, a novice nun named Kema. She was gentle by nature, soft-spoken, and deeply observant. She did not speak often in the chanting hall, nor lead meditations, but when she was present, even the trees seemed to quiet themselves. Kema had been orphaned young and taken in by the sisters of the nunnery. Though they raised her with love, she carried a sadness she never spoke aloud. She often sat by herself near the edge of the waterfall, watching the drops fall endlessly from the cliff, vanishing into the stream below. For hours she would sit there, still as stone. When asked what she was doing, she would say softly, "I'm listening to the raindrops return." The elder bhikkhunis worried. "She's too quiet," they said. "She should study more, chant more, speak more." But one stormy afternoon, as thunder rolled through the mountains and rain began to fall in heavy sheets, the nuns took shelter inside, except for Kema. She walked calmly into the downpour and stood with her face lifted to the sky. Her robe clung to her small frame, soaked through. She held out her hand, palm open, as if greeting each drop. One of the elders called to her, "Child, you'll catch cold." Kema turned, smiling gently, and said, "Not if I become the rain." That night, as the others dried their robes and stirred warm tea, Kema came to the hall and, for the first time, asked to speak. She told them this: "When I was young, I thought I was separate, from people, from peace, from the world. But the rain has taught me otherwise. Each drop falls alone, but never stays alone. It returns to the earth, to the rivers, to the sky. I am just like that. So are you. So is sorrow. So is joy. All things return." The nuns listened, some with closed eyes, tears falling like soft rain down their cheeks. In her stillness, Kema had become a teacher, not with sermons, but with presence. Moral of the story: we are never truly separate. Like a raindrop returning to the sea, we belong to something larger. When we live gently and listen deeply, even silence becomes a teaching. Peace flows not from knowing everything, but from remembering we're part of everything. The smile that ended war. Long ago, in a valley divided by pride and pain, two kingdoms stood on opposite sides of a river. For generations, they had fought over land, water, and stories that had grown heavier with each retelling. Fathers passed down anger to sons, queens sat on thrones carved from resentment, and warriors learned to hate before they learned to speak. The river that once brought life now marked separation. No one crossed it without a sword, but on the border of the Eastern Kingdom there lived a monk named Siran. He had no allegiance, no armor, and no fear. His monastery was small, built of stone and silence. Every morning he walked to the river with a bowl in his hands, not to gather food, but to offer prayers for both sides. People called him foolish. "You'll be shot," they warned. "You'll be taken as a spy." But Siran only smiled. Not with arrogance, not with defiance, with presence. A smile that neither challenged nor submitted, but simply understood. One morning, while he sat by the riverbank in meditation, a young soldier from the Western Kingdom crept near, bow drawn, eyes burning. "You're on enemy ground," the soldier said. Siran opened his eyes, looked up, and smiled, not nervously, not bravely, but gently, as if seeing the boy not as a threat, but as someone who had forgotten who he was. The soldier hesitated. Siran stood and said softly, "You've carried a weapon longer than you've carried peace. That must be heavy." The boy didn't answer. His hands trembled. He had faced many men, some who begged, some who fought, but none who smiled. "I came to kill," the boy admitted. "I know," Siran said, "and I came to remember. So you could too." The boy dropped his bow. Word spread fast. Both sides expected punishment, retaliation, a message of weakness, but none came. The kingdoms, puzzled, watched as more soldiers refused to fire across the river. Others crossed it quietly to meditate beside the monk. The silence grew stronger than the shouts. It began with one smile and ended with none of them remembering exactly how the war had begun. Moral of the story: sometimes the greatest strength is the one that doesn't resist or retreat, but simply sees. A true smile, born from compassion and presence, holds no weapon, but disarms everything. Peace doesn't always roar. Sometimes it begins with a single, steady breath and the courage to meet anger with kindness. The cloak of unknowing. In the snowy highlands where clouds hung low and footsteps vanished within minutes, there lived a traveling monk named Soria. Unlike other monks who carried sacred texts, beads, or even bowls, Soria wore only a simple grey cloak, thick, worn, and hooded. No one knew where he came from or which lineage he followed. When asked, he would only smile and say, "I follow what arises." He never gave formal teachings, but villagers who met him often felt lighter after speaking with him. He asked strange questions, and when he answered, it was often with more questions. "What do you know for certain?" he once asked a scholar. When the man replied with a long list of scriptures and ideas, Soria simply said, "That is knowing. Now tell me what you trust when that knowing disappears." People called him the monk of unknowing, sometimes with reverence, sometimes with confusion. One harsh winter evening, Soria came upon a woman weeping in the road. Her child was sick, her crops ruined, her hope lost. "The gods are silent," she said. "The monks speak in riddles. I want answers." Soria took off his cloak and placed it over her shoulders. "I don't have answers," he said, "only warmth." The woman blinked, tears still on her cheeks. "But what good is warmth when I don't understand why this is happening?" Soria looked at the snow falling gently between them. "Not understanding is a gate," he said. "The mind fears what it can't control, so it rushes to name, fix, grasp. But pain is not always a riddle to solve. Sometimes it is a winter to walk through, slowly, cloaked in presence." He left before morning, as quietly as the snow itself. Years later, travelers spoke of a grey cloak left behind in temples and homes, passed from one to another, not for its fabric, but for its reminder. It's okay not to know. It's okay to sit with questions that have no answers. What matters is how we sit, with compassion, with courage, with others. Moral of the story: peace doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from learning to be kind while holding the questions. In the soft space of unknowing, we discover humility, connection, and a deeper truth. That even without understanding, we can still choose love. The lotus that sang in the night. There was once a pond hidden deep in the forest, untouched by footpaths or prayer flags. It was a quiet place, fed by moonlight and mist, where frogs whispered their songs and the water held the stars like secrets. In the very center of this pond grew a single lotus, pure white, with petals so wide and soft they looked like folded wings. But what made the lotus unlike any other was a tale passed softly among the forest monks, that on certain nights when the world was most still, the lotus would sing. Not loudly, not with words, but with a sound felt more than heard, a gentle hum that soothed animals, calmed aching hearts, and stirred tears in those who sat nearby. It wasn't music of the ears, but music of the soul. Many doubted the story. A flower cannot sing, they said. That is only the imagination of those who meditate too long. Still, a young novice named Pema believed. Each evening after his chores, he would walk barefoot to the edge of the pond and sit cross-legged, waiting in silence. Nights passed, then weeks, then seasons. Nothing. No sound, no song, only the rustle of leaves and the cool breath of the night. One night, discouraged and weary, Pema almost turned back. But something told him to stay, not to wait for a miracle, but to let go of needing one. He closed his eyes, not to listen, but to be with the stillness. He followed his breath, felt the wind, watched his thoughts pass like shadows over water. And in that space, where seeking had fallen away, he felt it. A vibration, soft, inside his chest, not from the air, but from within. The lotus had not changed, but he had. The song wasn't from the flower, but from the silence he had entered. The peace he had once searched for outside was blooming now, petal by petal, in his own heart. He wept, not out of sorrow, but from recognition. From that day on, Pema no longer told others the lotus sang. Instead, he simply invited them to sit, to listen, to feel. Some heard it, some didn't, but none ever left unchanged. Moral of the story: the world speaks not always with sound, but with stillness. When we stop searching, we begin to hear. The deepest songs are not sung out loud. They rise from the silence inside us, blooming like a lotus in the night.